Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Good morning, one and all. Yep, it is now. Thank you. Good morning. This is our second session of the budget review. I'm Tom Jacobs, and I'd like to have the rest of my colleagues introduce themselves. Maybe from, we've got Nancy Lively, who is going to be reporting on the meeting. Chad?
Good morning, Chad Gordon.
Hello, I'm Jeannie Jenkins.
Hi, Donald Campbell.
I'm Jim Carroll.
Good morning, Carson Thurber.
Thank you for coming, Jean Connor.
And I'm Stuart Hurd, Town Manager.
Great. What we're going to do this morning is continue on our journey, our annual journey. We'll continue where we have not so much left off, but where we've set our compass. I just want to remind the board that as we look at the budget and look at Stu's oversight presentation statement, that that we've got some significant interest in increasing various areas of the budget, but also considering that there are no major increases in revenues, we have to balance the wants with the needs, or the needs with the wants. So we'll be doing that. So I think we'll go directly into it, if we could. Who is first up? Are we going to be doing the libraries first?
Yeah, the Bennington Free Library is first on the agenda.
Great, thanks. I now have my agenda in front of me. Good morning, Lynn.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Lynn.
Are we on? Are we
Yes,
live?
you're on. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. To those of you out in Cat TV land who don't know who I am, my name is Lynn Fontenot McCann. I'm the director of the Bennington Free Library. You've all received my ginormous packet, I think, when we sent in our appropriation request, and I added a few things today. You should all get our newsletter, but I wanted to make sure you saw it because I will be referring to that a little bit. Perhaps I'll start with the fact sheet and then we can get into the budget after I run through a few things. Circulation is down slightly, but that seems to be a trend that's pretty consistent throughout the nation with libraries, and I'm not really sure why, except that we're having some of our better readers are passing away, and the younger generation is more relying on electronic resources and maybe even reading less. However, our visits are up, and that's really what I think is important to see. They may not be checking out books, but they are coming into the library, and they are using our resources, and they are attending our programs. Technology access, we trained over 4,000 people on our computers. We were able to add 5 laptop computers to the library's lineup, bringing our total to 19. That reduced the wait time for people that were looking for computers. And it also gave us some flexibility in terms of people, we're kind of limited in terms of the space that we have in the library. So the staff can check out a laptop computer, somebody can go sit in the quiet room, they can sit in the reference area, they're not limited to sitting right at the bank of computers. That gives them a little more privacy, and it also allows people to work longer on projects that they may need to work on. Let me see, 94.8% of Bennington's contributions are spent locally. I know last year we looked at the per capita tax support. I don't have, the Vermont Department of Libraries asks us to present or to submit a report every year in terms of our statistics, and they're a little bit behind this year, so I'm a little behind in terms of getting everyone's current information. So I did the best I could in terms of per capita tax support, but you can see this is using the same criteria across the board for all of these libraries. I know that there may be a little difference in terms of what figures you would arrive at based on what the actual Bennington population is, but the Department of Libraries uses Bennington, a portion of Shasberry, and Woodford to arrive at their figure for the figures that you see here. And it's similar with the other towns as well. The only change I have in the handout that I gave you is that I did hear at the last minute from Rutland for fiscal year 19, which is this year. Overall, their per capita tax support, and they receive from a number of towns as we do, is $39. For Rutland Town itself, they give $49 per capita. So any questions about the fact sheet?
I have one question. I'm interested in Active accounts, I think I emailed you about that.
We
So
did.
the number of active library
Yes.
accounts.
What we consider active, well, we have registered borrowers, and that's for the last 10 years. But for active accounts, and we consider for the last 3 years, it's a little over 6,000 people. Sorry I didn't get back to you on that, Donald.
No, thank you. 6,000, okay.
Yeah.
Other members, questions for Lynn on this fact sheet? Hearing none, Lynn? I think-
Okay. Some of the initiatives we've undertaken, as you may have noticed, the roof was completed this year.
Yes.
It was in slate. We were able to fundraise, we received some bequests, as well as a $25,000 grant from the state for the Building Communities Grant, which allowed us to complete that project for a little under $250,000. Done. For the next 100 years, we hope. So,
And this has been an ongoing challenge and effort. And yeah, you've been talking and working on this for the last
for a very long time.
5 years plus,
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, the
That's-
roofs
you're
were
being-
old.
Yeah,
and-
you've been to be congratulated on that effort, bringing the public and private effort into the play.
Well, I have to thank my board and staff for really working
Really?
on that. Yeah,
Well, they-
really getting out there and, putting the thumb screws on people to donate. And the community's been very supportive, and we thank you.
Make sure that gets back to your board, that we're very appreciative as a community for that effort, because, that's a big expense that it's been anticipated for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And it finally came to fruition, yes.
Well, and it's beautiful.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
beautiful. I'm glad we were able to do the slate.
Yeah.
It's really fine work, and we won't
What are
have
you
to
going
worry.
to do, what are you going to do with the used thumb screws?
I think we'll just have-
Those we're holding those.
You're gonna hold them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
We have other projects.
Lynn, excuse me, one more question before you switch over. So I've been struggling a lot with the kind of how much our community should be paying for library services, both in Bennington and North Bennington. So I've been looking a lot at the per capita cost, trying to think what's fair between Bennington and North Bennington. So does this number that you've used, I came up with a higher number, but does this number include the population of North Bennington?
I'm not sure. I think they said that it was Bennington, Shasberry, and Woodford.
Okay.
When I asked yesterday, I don't remember him mentioning North
Okay.
Bennington.
I did the same math, and I just divided by Bennington using a population of a little over 15,000 and came up with 3252, which is still on the low end, but it's not as low as
Okay.
as this would indicate.
Donald, you keep me on track every year. I start
don't
working.
mean to- I'm not, yeah, we're just trying to think about, we
Sure.
have 2 libraries that we want to support here, and we're trying to figure out, and we have different tax systems in each town, so trying to figure out what's fair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. The roof is completed. We are working on, actually, we're getting bids for a dedicated children's bathroom. With the opioid crisis and the security issues and the number of people that are in and out of the library, we've decided that we really need to have a bathroom that's just available to families and children when they're in the children's room. And the estimated cost on that is going to be $10,000 to $12,000. We think that we can do it without, well, we know we can create a handicap bathroom without changing the existing footprint of the library. So we're going to be moving forward on that, and hope to have that completed by the end of this year. We switched to LED lights from metal halide, which at the time that they were installed with the Freeman grant were top of the high tech, anyway. They were the best you could do, but they're unreliable, they're costly, and they have mercury, which makes them difficult to dispose of. So we're switching to halide. It cost us about under $500 to do that, and we have an estimated savings of about $430 annually, so it's a good move. Weatherworks, we're working on increased insulation and circulation area. We're continuing to fundraise for capital improvement goals. Heating system and flooring in the Main Street building are targeted after the bathroom and insulation work is completed. That's all part of our capital improvement plan. I think you probably all got copies of that a year or two ago. In terms of services, the handout from the children's room is included in the newsletter that I gave you, so you should take a look at that for children's and young adult initiatives. We received a grant of snowshoes from Rise Vermont. We received 4 pair of adult and 2 pair of children. We have free passes that are available for folks to check out with their library card to Prospect, so it's a good collaboration, and we are going to be working with them a little further to see if there are more grant funds available for additional programming with the library. We have improved our access to the Bennington Banner. Once again, take a look at the newsletter from 1999 to the present, so that can be searched online with your library card, which is a great thing. You don't even have to come into the library, and that offers access to national and world news as well. We are going to be initiating this month at the library, just a kind of an email outreach to people that are signed up. This is what's going on, this is what's coming up. Quarterly newsletters are great, but it doesn't really keep pace with what's going on. I mean, we're always developing new programs and things, and services, so that'll be a good way to keep our patrons.
Lynn,
Yes.
go back a little bit just about the banner.
Yep.
With the library card, you can access the banner website, is that right?
Not the website. This is, it's an online database of articles.
Okay.
Okay, so you can go in and you can search from 1999 forward to the present. Older stuff we have on microfilm from 1924, I believe, to about mid-1960s. So
When
there's a
I-
little gap in coverage, but,
When I was a kid,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in the basement going through the microfiche.
yeah. Yeah, well, you don't have to go to the basement anymore. We actually have it on the main level. And we have much nicer equipment than we did
Do you still
then.
have the old wheels, or is it all on?
Yes, it
digital?
is still, but now they have, it's electronic, and you can download articles, you can email them to yourself, you don't have to print stuff out on horrible paper and hope for a good copy. You can change the polarity, it's wonderful. We bought that a few years ago we did some fundraising, and some local businesses contributed to that. Fine Forgiveness Day. Currently, we do it during National Library Week in our open house one day, and, we've kind of tossed around the idea of not having fines, but unfortunately, in this community, it's the only way to get our books back, so.
How far back do you forgive?
I'm getting to that. It's only for books that are currently overdue. Do you have a big cache of books at your house?
Couple.
Well, if they predate that when we automated, you're probably good. Just drop them off in the night deposit box, and you'll be all set.
I think they may be out of print.
Put them in the slot.
Well, maybe they're worth something now. But anyway, every quarter, we're going to have a Fine Forgiveness Day, and hopefully that encourage people to bring things in and make it a little easier for people. I mean, we use, the circulation staff are pretty good, and if someone comes in and there have been extenuating circumstances for why they can get their books back, we don't penalize them, because we want people to come in. We want them to use the library and check out books. But this, we think, will help as well. Head of Circulation, Wendy Sharkey, attended a conference in Chicago. Our library is one of 10 in the nation selected to attend. It was funded by Simmons University, New Americans Open Technology Institute, and the Internet, too. And it was just to really look at how broadband is serving the needs of their communities, and to see if we can look at ways of measuring data and to better serve our communities in terms of the services and the resources we're providing. I think that's it for now. So on to the budget. Yes, I've asked you for a big increase this year, 3.7%. Not quite as much to Shasberry and Woodford, but we think that it's an equitable ask in terms of the size of our populations. Our overall budget is up 3.4%. And that is chiefly because of wages and personnel costs. You'll see that our adult gifts have not been on track, so we've reduced that figure, which is at the top under support, but we've also upped the ante for fundraising for the board, so that increase is absorbed by an increase in the fundraising line. A decrease was absorbed by that. Any questions about the revenue support side?
I think probably the obvious is that, like many agencies, departments within the town, it's the impact is on the personnel, salary, wages, benefits side, which you have little or no control. The control, I guess, is that you cut staff or you limit the hours and all of those, and which is counterproductive from what you're offering to the community. So I know you've asked for, an increase across the spectrum, but if you look at where the increase comes from, it's right there at the bottom line.
It's all personnel.
Yeah, exactly, and it's like, if If anything, you're probably going to become more and more automated, but you need also reserves to accomplish that task too. So at least from my observation, the request seems consistent with the need. But that's just an observation, because that's my observation. But other questions from the board on the budget side of it?
Feels to me like the only place we should be looking is at this personnel cost, because this is a tight budget. You're projecting a slight increase in revenue, so you're clearly working hard on your fundraising and your grants and whatnot. You've really made an effort to hold your costs steady, but that increase, almost a 5% increase, in the total personnel cost, is really makes up more than what the increase you're asking for. So I would say let's just break that down a little bit more to make sure that we're all confident that that's in fact coming from external sources that you can't control, and that there's no economy for us there. And if that's the case, then I'd say we move on to next budget.
I think that's a good point. Probably going back to the North Bennington relationship with McCullough, maybe you could just give us an oversight, and we'll have the same discussion with Jenny and Mary. How do you interface? How do you work together? Because this is within 7-8 miles from each other. What is the relationship, and what is the support?
Well, Jenny worked for us before she went to North Bennington, so, we have that relationship originally anyway. But we're very different communities, actually, North Bennington and Bennington, but there are situations, none of which are coming to mind immediately, where we collaborate. Jenny is very involved with Catamount Library Network, as we are, and she's taken on a lot of responsibility. When there are opportunities to work together, we do, but it's not, we're not mutually exclusive, but we do have separate collections and separate budgets and separate personnel.
You're not exchanging resources at this point?
Well, only in the sense that we're doing interlibrary loan, but there are resources that we share in terms of online databases and that sort of thing that are statewide, that we all share. So Vermont's a pretty tight little library community, and resource sharing is, we can't not buy books for one collection and buy them in another. That's not part of the agreement with the monies that we got from Freeman and that we get from the state, or that we not reduce our budget by looking at other libraries and what they're carrying, let's say, in their collections. Does that make sense? Am I clear on that? But when the opportunity arises to work together, we do.
I guess I'm wondering about not just necessarily the future or the present, but the future relative to technology and having the ability to access the Bennington Free Library with the technology that's available, computer enhancements, networks. It's probably beyond the scope of our discussion.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
In terms of technology, we're pretty self-sustaining, I think. Jenny probably has volunteers that help her with her computer. We do, certainly. We have our head of CERC, who is also like our technology goddess. I know I mentioned in my cover letter to you that we have one person that's doing 3 jobs, so we needed to add a few hours to our personnel budget, and hopefully next year we'll give her a few more hours to give her a break.
If we could just push on that a little bit.
Go ahead. Please. No, you're not.
No, we can get back to that. But, the $18,000 increase on the, from the town of Bennington really is pretty close to the $20,000 increase in the personnel cost.
Right.
And that seems okay if it's beyond your control. And we have the benefit of this summary, but let me just say, if I'm reading it correctly, you're not increasing your staff personnel except for those 3 hours for technology.
Yes.
So it's not like that increase is coming from adding a lot of people or adding things that could be cut. You're pretty much level staffing.
We are,
Is that
except
right?
for adding some additional hours, and we're going to
technology.
do that gradually over the next couple of years.
Which is an increasing demand category from the community, so
Right.
we would be supportive of that. So this increase in personnel cost is really all being driven by minimum wage increases and other state forces that are beyond your control.
Yes, and I want to point out that A lot of our staff are making at or slightly more than the minimum wage, and these are skilled jobs that these people are performing every day. We are way behind the curve in our compensation for staff, if you compare us to what other communities are paying. So I think it's warranted. I think it's justified, and I hope you'll approve the increase.
Okay, that's it from me. I'm satisfied that the increase is beyond their control and the services are warranted. Great.
I have no questions, just thank you for this wonderful resource in our community, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
What she said.
Carson?
Tom was, I don't want to speak for Tom, or if he was looking at this, just every time we look at these two library, or every time I look at these two library budgets, I just find you guys are geographically very close, and we are a small community, and that's always where, when I see two separate line items, I know they're two separate buildings, different staffs, even different towns, but there's not an overwhelming amount of individuals that live here, and I just always wonder how you guys can work more closely together to help save money collectively. And I'm sure you are, we're tasked with always trying to keep these budgets across the spectrum lower, and they tick up annually, and I just think as a community we need to always collectively look at how we can save money. And I know compensation-wise you guys it's an incredibly difficult job what you're doing, and I just always think, Tom, I don't know if you were going in that direction with your observation,
Well, basically, it would be great if we could have an intranet between the two so that the access could be across the spectrum. That comes with significant expense, but going to what you're saying, it's like I see these as almost combined assets for our community. Yeah.
And I don't know the perfect answer to it. I just see two budgets, similar responsibilities, and the idea of allowing people access to knowledge and books and information. And I just want to state that. Maybe I said it last year too, but with both budgets ticking up a little bit, maybe there's opportunities or possibilities that could help keep the budgets lower for working more together.
In terms of personnel, I don't know how we could do less with what we're doing now. And when I came on as director, we cut library hours by 8 hours, open to the public. I mean, in terms of we have 6 full-time people.
You don't have to. You
Yeah.
don't have to answer. It's just
Yeah.
it's just something where 5-10 years from now, as we look, we could be on the same path we're on now with two separate budgets, or we have to come to a realization maybe there's not the opportunity or enough people to have two standing structures with two buildings. I mean, I'm not thinking that is something that's going to happen, but it's a fair
Question.
It's a fair
Yes.
question. Just when we look toward long-term planning. You
Whether or
put a
not the community
100-year roof on your building. I mean, you're thinking long-term, so we should think long-term in
Yeah.
every way.
Yeah, can the community support 2 libraries? But,
Second comment.
Yeah, well, and Carson, so I'm with you. That's why I was after active accounts, which is a very coarse measurement maybe of how people are using the library, but I was surprised to see in the North Bennington Library, which we'll get to in a minute, that they have 3,500 active accounts, or so they say, which is a lot if you think about Bennington as having 6,000 active accounts. And so I would say that both libraries, at least by the metrics that we're getting, both the libraries are getting a lot of use. So it's not like one is really getting a lot of use and the other's not, I would say.
I'm not looking for an answer today. I'm
Right.
just thinking it's the right moment in the conversation to say, at some point, we're going to have honest conversations. These budgets tick up across all categories.
That's right.
We have to be mindful of things like that.
And it's made even more complicated by the fact that North Bennington has a different structure for it. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment. When I was listening to the discussion about people walking in the door is decreasing, and I don't know if, Jenny, you're experiencing the same thing, but it sort of reminded me of the school system. Just because enrollment is down and classes are not as full, the cost of education really doesn't change. So it's sort of that same dynamic.
Yeah. Actually, the number of people walking through the door has increased. It's our circulation
Oh,
figures
circulation has
that's
decreased.
gone
Okay.
down a little bit.
Yeah.
So more people are coming in and using the library. It's just they're not necessarily
Yeah.
checking out books.
Yeah, so, anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
And the state, we do share technology in the sense that we have shared databases, we have some support, some technology support from the state. But because we don't have we have a statewide library system, but it really chiefly serves the legislature, we receive some support, but for the most part, we're somewhat on our own. Yes, you, Jim. Maybe you can do something about that.
Get my best people.
Okay, good.
And thank you very much. Who would have thought that, not too many years ago, people would be going in to get their snowshoes into the local library?
And that's just the beginning.
Exactly. But it is the transformation of the library as we knew it and now know it.
Yeah, well, libraries have to be very creative in the way they serve their communities, and
Right.
we're trying very hard and are always open, certainly, to suggestions from our public about, resources that they would like us to offer. One of them is the free passes. You got that in your handout, which is, it's been very, very successful.
That's great. Thank you and
Thank
your
you.
board. Thanks very much.
Very good job.
John G. McCullough, Free Library. Has it been a year already since you were here?
While Jenny's passing that out, I'll just make a comment that...
This is Mary Rogers for the
Yes,
folks,
Mary
yeah.
Rogers, thank you. I think, to your point about how do we think long-term and what's going to happen a decade or two from now, I think it's actually very valid, but, with our library, and I'm certain the same in Bennington, when you talk about foot traffic, it's exactly that. It is people locally walking in. So I think the larger context is, as we look at our communities and the growth of our communities, how do we make the things that we have available to people who do walk from place to place?
In addition to that, I'm Jenny Rozicki from the John G. McCullough Free Library. At the beginning of this meeting, we were talking about the difference between wants and needs, and I would emphasize that we are providing vital resources that are necessary to people's lives. Information literacy instruction, access to free wireless internet, and our free public access computers that give people health information, legal access, job applications, email, standard services that are necessary for functioning in society. Nonfiction. For children, early literacy instruction, and our summer reading program, which helps children prevent the summer slide in reading skills, which saves the education system money. I would emphasize that these are needs and not wants. But we do the wants as well. We have entertaining items as well as instructional ones. Last night we had an introduction to Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. People had a lot of fun. Later this morning we're doing Lego robotics with the 4-H Club for children. And this afternoon, Lindy Lynch will be doing a book reading over at the Left Bank, hosted by the library. So we cover, later this month, we're doing preventing Medicare fraud and other sorts of ways that seniors are defrauded. So these are vital bits of information and community coming together. So just maybe put it in the needs category and not the wants.
Thanks for that.
As you can see from our at-a-glance sheet, we had a fantastic year. Library accounts, we had just about 400 people signed up for new accounts this year. That was kind of the big, people are coming in. They're opening McCullough Library accounts. We had an increase in visitors. We had Our increase in circulation from 2017 held firm, and we built on that. So CIRC is up for us. I think that our interlibrary loan capabilities, since joining Catamount Library Network, the shared catalog we share with the Bennington Free Library has had a huge part in that. And our digital resources have been huge. People are borrowing ebooks and e-audiobooks very regularly. That was kind of a huge surge this past year. We also received 8 pairs of snowshoes from Rise VT, and that's just the foundation for our upcoming tool library. So if you need a hammer, come see us, you know? Or if you need exercise equipment or a fancy cake pan, come see us. We're working on it and we're taking suggestions. Passes for museums and other attractions. You can get those there too, at the library as well. We hosted over 240 programs last year, and we had over 3,000 people attending, which is kind of awesome. Staff at the library answered more than 2,200 questions, and this can range from everything like, how do I start an email account, to, is this email legitimate, to, do you have a book recommendation? I like cozy mysteries. We answer all those questions. Or, I really like Harry Potter, what else should I read? So it was a good year in that respect. Fundraising, our annual fund did very well last year. It was our best ever. This coming year has been steady. We're in the middle of it right now, but at present it has raised almost $16,000. Let's see, we've done a great deal in donor development, as in outreach letters to our larger donors, a donor thank you event and update, just kind of bringing folks up to speed to see what we do and what we're planning. Our Friends of the Library group had a very good year. Our annual book and bake sale raised almost $9,000. Our raffle, our winner was very enthusiastic about winning, raised about $1,900. Our online, we sell books online as well. Like the higher end donations we receive, we sell them online, and we have ongoing sales in the library and at Powers Market, and those are steady. We have another small book sale coming up at the end of the month for Winterfest. I would like to point out that North Bennington unanimously voted in favor of a 60% increase in funding for the McCullough Library, and that Shaftesbury voters approved a 100% increase, with the same proportion, pretty much, that when we had asked for half that much.
That was last year's annual meeting?
Yes, yes. And we, staff and some volunteer efforts in our board have applied for a number of grants and have received some gifts for programming funding, a new book drop, Art Cliff grant from the Children's Literacy Foundation, which put over 150 new children's books in the children's collection, and 2 pretty high-end author events as well. But it's worth noting that grants and gifts often don't cover operating expenses. And we, in the past year, we have prioritized reaching out to our Bennington patrons as well. And in that packet, there's a full list of organizations and businesses we've partnered with in the past year. You'll often find us at the farmers market. We are hosting cookbook exchanges all winter and once a month during the summer.
Yeah, seen.
So,
We've seen you in action around the farmers markets at all. This is a bit of history for some of the board members. Remember, Jean, not too many years ago, maybe 2.5, 3 years?
Yeah.
When we visited, I think it was my office with yourselves.
It was last year.
And was it just last year?
It was last year, yeah.
It was before the meeting.
Yes.
And there was a really clarion call because the library was in serious financial stress. And I think you made your argument very well, both to Gene and myself, and also to the board at the budget meeting last year, to go from, what was it, 75? I forget the number from the year before, but to get to the figure of 22,000. So I guess that what I'm asking for is we went to that amount, and now there's another increase to a requested of 32. And I see the village of North Bennington and Shaftesbury are stable, the same request that you had last year.
Yes.
Are you asking for us, the town of Bennington, to catch up? Is that really why we're doing this now?
Yes, there's some of that. We felt that the increases that we asked from North Bennington and Bennington were extremely significant, and that we would see what we could do with that level funding going forward in this year. Because we had asked for a larger increase from Bennington and received a smaller increase, we decided to emphasize our request to Bennington. And Bennington has more people. You know, there's a larger tax base for that.
Even though North Bennington does share in that as well as their own. And North Bennington residents are well aware of that fact.
That's what's so complicated, right?
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
pays into the
But
general
not-
fund, and
yeah.
everybody can
Not-
use
yeah.
both libraries.
But I will say the people that we converse with find it well worth their dollar, their tax dollar, to support both libraries.
You said there's a third of the library population using, that's Bennington proper? Or
Yes, roughly a
Yeah,
third.
Yeah, I guess
So,
that's part of the answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
Gene, maybe here, we'll
I
start, or go ahead, either way.
Go
Just
ahead.
one quick question. I know it's a small detail, but it was just a big jump for me. Under the facility equipment and computer maintenance, that's, I saw in your notes of migrating to a new system with Microsoft.
yes, so part of this is that the staff computers, the 2 computers that we use to check books in and out, are, they need help. We need replacements. They're easily almost 10 years old, and they're feeling their years. So we need 2 new staff computers. The other part of that is we would like to not replace our in-house server, because we no longer need it, with transitioning to Microsoft 365, which would keep our files basically in the cloud, rather than replacing an in-house server, which formerly held our catalog, but since our catalog is now cloud-based, it's the catalog we share with other libraries, we don't need to have it, and it would prevent replacing that, which would be $5,000 rather than $3,000.
So is that increase now going to be an annual cost, or just as a one-time setup, or?
I believe it's a one-time for the migration of that information to Microsoft 365, but after that, I believe that that is free for libraries or extremely low cost.
Thank you.
Hi. I was also struck by a third of the patrons being from Bennington, and, at some point, someone had mentioned that the 2 libraries serve very different communities. So I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about why you're seeing a third of your patrons being Bennington residents. What is it why is that, I guess?
Well, I would say for some folks who live in Bennington, it's geographic proximity. Our services are roughly, I think that would be part of it. Folks who maybe work in North Bennington but live in Bennington, it's more convenient, or they live in New York and we're more on the way. And I think a part of our surge that we've seen is that we did eliminate late fines for items. And this is actually, it's a bit of a success story, really. We see items coming back. And when items come back late, people have the opportunity to donate. and they often donate more than what the late fine would have been for that.
Guilt works.
Right, but we get the books back, and we need to replace fewer of them. So it's been more of a restorative process rather than a punitive one, and that's really worked well for us.
Matter of fact, last year, I believe I was looking at this the other day, and I think it was something like only $65 or something that we had to do to replace lost items last year.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, because I was just thinking about Donald and Carson's comments about ways to either specialize, have specialization between the two libraries, or something that allows for a distinction, or do we need to have the same, comparable resources in both
In thinking
communities?
about working together, the fact that we joined Catamount Library Network, the consortium, means that we are working more closely together now than we ever have. We share that catalog, and that's huge. So, and in terms of a branch library, I would, if that was an option, I would put out there that it would probably be more expensive in terms of pay for staff. For example, none of us are full-time at the McCullough Library, and none of us receive benefits, and salaries are very low for those who do not. So it would probably in some ways be more expensive. In terms of resource sharing, I believe the state divides out like access to the online databases in terms of branch locations, not in terms of which roof do they share. So I think it would be perhaps even more expensive to combine organizations.
Okay, thank you.
I spent a fair amount of time with Stuart trying to figure out, get clear in my head what I think is fair in this situation. And I think for the board's purpose, in this conversation, we need to remember that North Bennington is still part of Bennington. We're not two completely individual communities, but we have a complicated tax and sort of governmental relationship, which makes things not easy. But if I'm living in North Bennington, my tax dollars are going into the general fund, which are paying, by my calculations, roughly $32 a person for the Bennington Library, even though you live in North Bennington. And so I think the question is, what's it fair for the people, what is it fair for the general fund to be paying to the North Bennington Library? Since each North Bennington resident is paying this kind of $32 a person for the Bennington Library, they're also paying an extra tax in the form of the $25,000 that North Bennington adds to their tax base. So North Bennington people are paying a fair amount of tax. They're paying for both libraries, and they're paying an extra amount of tax for their library.
Yeah.
So I think we should be grateful for that. But it still, after all of the ways I kind of looked at the numbers and chopped it up, I can't come up with a system that I think is fair. I can't really figure out a way of looking at these two budgets as different. I would say that the two libraries are, if you kind of count what Bennington right now is giving North Bennington, or is putting towards the North Bennington Library, the general fund is putting towards the North Bennington Library, plus what North Bennington is putting towards your library, you're in this somewhere in the $35 per person range, which is in the range of what the Bennington Library is spending. So and that's using the new proposed number, the $32,000 request number. So all this is just to say, I'm not sure that there is a really good way for this board to figure out a fairness issue under the current governmental structure that we have, where so many things are shared and so many things are not shared, like fire and whatnot. So I'm inclined to say that if North Bennington residents are willing to pay the $25,000 extra for their library, and the town of Bennington is being asked to put $32,000 in, and we come up to a pretty close per capita expenditure. In other words, the residents of North Bennington and residents of Bennington per capita expense. It's as close to fair as I can figure out. So although it's a big increase from 22,000 to 32,000, I would say it feels pretty close to fair. I have one question for you on the budget, which is that you talk about a sort of robust increase in fundraising, but I don't see that following through to the budget. So if I look at the income side of this, I see the 24,000 that you raised last year, but I don't see the other fundraising successes that you list in this.
Well, okay, well, first of all, we budgeted that we were going to raise $24,000. We actually did 16. With the second thing was the other donations, which are the $14,000. We actually did 7. So we're not decreasing that in next year's budget. We're simply telling ourselves we need to do better.
Okay.
So that is essentially, what, $9,000-$10,000 increase in the 2019 budget, even though budget to budget, it looks
I see.
like it's nothing.
So I read your our best fundraising year on record as I was imagining that was exceeding your budget, but no, your best fundraising year on record is still half of what you budgeted
Yeah.
for fundraising. So I think for the past couple of years we've been trying to egg you on to increase
Yes.
your local non-governmental support, and I know that's hard money to raise, but I would certainly like to continue to see your organization work on that to the extent possible. And
Absolutely. In addition to our annual fund, we also hosted our first Table of Contents Gala at the end of April. Our second will be at most likely the end of April this year. And that raised $5,200 altogether, so, which is considerable.
And
It was,
that's the budget line there that you see the $14,000 last year and this year.
so in 18 you budgeted 24,000 of fundraising, you raised 16,000.
Correct.
And yet you think you can get to 25,000 this year?
We think we need to keep pushing ourselves to do it. In addition to that, we also have, Kathy, our president, has a pre-application into USDA for a grant to add an elevator to the building, to bring it handicap compliant. And so at the same time we're doing this, which this annual fund is for operating expenses, we'll
capital.
also be doing, if we're successful with that grant, a separate launch for the capital improvement needed for whatever that grant won't cover, which we know is not going to be 100%.
So, but all of these things that you've listed, your bake sale, your raffle basket, your
Book sales.
The book
the
sales,
other things
yes.
that you mentioned, all of those things are contained within the 16,000?
They are, half of it is within the Friends, most of it is within the Friends income, which is $13,000 in the 2019 budget. That is primarily the book sale, which Jenny said raised $9,000 last year, plus that raffle and some other little things, like when Jenny says the online book sales and things like that. So all of those things are within both the 2018 and 19 budget, primarily in the Friends event income and some in the other donations line.
I'd also like to point out that the Friends group generously helped us cover the gap in our budget last year by purchasing every new book, movie, and magazine subscription. They generally do not fund operating expenses, but they did last year. They saw the need and put funds toward that, which was significant.
Well, certainly, yeah, so that's a great place to have you focus. But, yeah, I think for this board's purposes, if we're thinking about, if you're a Bennington resident and you're saying, I don't use the North Bennington Library, well, we're hearing that 1/3 of the people that use the North Bennington Library are in fact Bennington residents. We're looking at this $32,000 is roughly $19 a person for the whole community. So we're looking at a much lower, if you're just from Bennington, you're looking at a much lower investment in the library, the North Bennington Library, than you are in the Bennington Library. Don't know if that helps anybody, but it feels to me like we're still in the realm of fairness under this budget.
Yeah. I think that to respond, the observation is that this library was so far behind the eight ball. Not too long ago, there was a real question about its longevity and survival. This leadership that is taking hold is trying to bring it to the point of survivability, and you have done that. But it's still it's a tenuous position. So while it may seem to be a significant increase, it really is not. It's really catch-up. It's like putting the roof on the library downtown here. And it's been unfortunate, but this leadership has taken and grasped that. And you have your friends and your beneficiary, the donations that you've been getting. It's really made a difference. But I think what the clarion call is that, yes, per capita, this is what it is today, but we have not been able to get that till our request today, if we honor it. So
we've asked about the endowment in the past. Is there what's left of the endowment at this point, and how did it do last year?
Our endowment is about, it's about $240,000 left. It is managed by Williams Financial, and Mr. Williams was making every attempt to be here today to support us, and in the event that anybody had any questions, but was unable to do so. I don't know yet what our return was for the current fiscal year. The board had made a unanimous decision a while ago to attempt to not use the endowment to simply settle the books. And we made a unanimous decision last year to only use the prior year interest. Our long-term goal on that is somewhere between a 4%, 6%, 8% annual return over the long term in that fund. We did have to take more than our interest last year, but by far less than we had in previous years. We have had in previous years used $30,000 to $50,000 in principal simply to cover expenses, and none of it was for capital expenses or improvements. It was just operating. So this year, this current budget is doing the same, as saying we intend to only take interest only.
Okay, so the $6,000 you've budgeted in income is just interest?
Is interest only.
Okay, thank you.
Now, we will have to, because we are short, we're going to fall short this year, we will have to use more than that, but the option is cutting services.
Presumably, the endowment would be for capital investments such as the elevator or things like that?
There is a separate endowment, very small, that was set up years ago for a building fund. And we did have a few contributions to that this year. There's maybe $80,000, $90,000 in that fund, but most of that's been there for decades, and it is only for building improvement. So that will go towards that elevator project when that gets there. But the unrestricted endowment is about $240,000.
Okay, thank you.
Jim?
Nothing, thank you.
Only because you mentioned it in regards to the fund that's established strictly for the building. Do you have any other funds that we're not necessarily asking you about? You have your unrestricted endowment, you have your capital, you have your building fund. Is there anything else that
we have $3,000, I want to say it's $3,000 in an...
Nothing sizable, like the $90,000?
Oh, God, no. No. No, we started some years ago, we tried to launch a sustainability campaign, which was donors pledged funds there if we would only use interest only. So that's in a separate account. That's not included in the 240.
We had a long
but it's-
conversation last year
it's
on
tiny.
your endowment, and that was
Yes.
one where
Yeah.
people before you didn't necessarily spend it the same way you guys
No.
are stewarding it now.
No, and the board votes every time and discusses every time if we take anything out of that endowment that's
It's great
not
management.
interest only.
When we had that discussion when the board had that discussion over the summer, it was to meet payroll.
Yes.
So we couldn't get around that.
Have you, Jenny and Lynn, have you ever explored joint purchasing, paper, just all the things that both libraries are purchasing? Was there an opportunity to possibly save? I mean, you could do that basically just not officially on paper, but hey, I'm putting in a paper order. Do you need paper? I don't know if it's even been explored or if it would be worth it.
So we do, at least at the McCullough Library, are you part of MHEC now? Yeah, so statewide, that's kind of managed. There
Okay.
are purchasing agreements that we have. For example, when we purchase books, we receive, through our own purchasing agreements for books, we receive anywhere between 46 and 11% off of list price for books. But if I need to go buy, paper, for example, MHEC, the Massachusetts Higher Education Consortium, we now are using that, and we can use it with our Staples account. So I'm investigating how to do that a little better. MHEC is like really comprehensive. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how all that works, but it's also part of the bidding process for jobs and things like that. But we already receive kind of Vermont-wide purchasing discounts from, say, we need to put laminate covers on the books. We receive a discount through Demco or any of the other companies we go through.
Okay.
For that stuff.
Okay. And the other thing, I was just thinking, two things. If you did not get this increase, what's going to be the impact on the library? What will you have to cut?
Hours, personnel,
Personnel.
further dipping into our endowment, that would be a very hard conversation to have.
Okay. You've probably thought about it, so,
Long and hard. Long and hard.
yeah.
The
And-
$5,000 for computers is an absolutely necessary investment in this year.
Yes.
Yeah, I think our server is not going to make it. It was installed 10 years ago or so, and it was to store our digital catalog originally, and all of our computers are networked through it. This would be the migration is a one-time cost, and it would save further costs down the road of more server replacements.
Yeah, so next year, presumably, that $5,000 budget line could go back down to $400 or $600, whatever it was before.
Yeah, good, yeah.
I have one more comment, and it's sort of a coordination between both libraries, which seems to be a running theme. Have you ever, or maybe you've thought about helping each other coordinating your marketing plans? So I think people would be more willing to donate to both libraries if you were sort of working in concert and supporting each other. I don't know if it's something you've thought about, but I don't really know as much about, I'm on the library board, so I know more, and I get your wonderful, wonderful newsletter, in my email. But it's sort of outside my consciousness a little bit, but if you were marketing together, I think you both may see your donations go up. It's just an idea.
Okay, so two things on that. I think in terms of usage, that a rising tide lifts all boats.
Right.
If people are enthusiastic about reading or DVDs they can get at the library and they have two separate accounts, they're going to use them. I pretty much use all three of my library accounts that I have when I'm in the area. So I think in terms of usage, that it's just generating enthusiasm. In terms of marketing, I've done a little sleuth work for your donor list and our donor list. The donor list that's published in the newsletters, it's different folks. So perhaps. But I don't know, we've been doing it independently for a
Yeah, and
very long time.
I wasn't talking about, only having one newsletter. It was mostly about programming and what you're offering and things that are going on, and you have snowshoes, that sort of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, so people could think more collectively rather than this library and this library, but you have these great options, and I'm not sure how many people are aware. Sure. I knew you'd get along.
I think they do. It's not easy for you folks to come this morning and share the budget and the challenges, but it's also very impressive and very much appreciated by this board to hear the efforts and the results of the Bennington Library, the McCullough Library. You are really working a lot hand in hand. It just doesn't appear on the surface, and there may be other ways over the years to bring that even closer. But go back to your boards, you as the leaders, and express our appreciation. And we'll look at the budgets and make a reasoned decision so that the voters of the entire Bennington will get the benefit of the continued library services that we're so fortunate to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. What we're going to do is, I think, thanks very much. We're going to continue right into the rescue squad, I think is the next one up. Then we'll take a break after we finish with the squad. So Representatives Forrest, Wayand, et al.
I struggle with the North Bennington thing, I really do.
Well, it's a catch-up. Otherwise, it's perfect. Yeah,
If it was one library system, and we were paying equal per capita, they'd be getting 52,000, not 32,000. Yes.
I know.
At some level, the Bennington taxpayers still, and non-North Bennington taxpayers still.
It's the usage, too,
Right.
I didn't realize it was that high. But I've heard people come to say, that little library, I go up there.
You guys sure know how to pay your room.
That's a struggle. Yep.
She's a supporter.
Life-saving, books life-saving.
Your words, not mine.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you doing?
How's it going?
All right. Let's get right into the request. Last year, we, as a community, provided $150,000. The proposed and requested allocation is $220,000. Maybe we ought to hear about your activity over the last year and how successful and why you're here asking for support again.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank everybody for your time this morning. Just real quick to reintroduce everybody in case you didn't know, the gentleman to my left is Brian Peete. He's the chairman of our board. And the gentleman on the right is Brian Murphy, is our vice chair, just so you guys know. So you have a 66% chance of being right if you say Brian towards the table. So yeah, we had a fantastic year. I'm going to sort of put this into three buckets real quick of sort of the things that are happening with Bennington Rescue. The first is workforce and workforce development. We hit sort of the bottom of the well this year as far as staffing. Anybody that wanted a...
Shut that door.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for trying, Bruce.
Hit the bottom of the well as far as our staffing. We, anyone that needed or wanted a full-time position with us, we were able to fill that need. We actually got to the point where we had over 7 open positions for staffing. Just like the police department, we don't necessarily have, there's no volunteer EMS agencies, at least in the Bennington area anymore. That obviously, during our vacancy times, we're relying on almost 300 hours of pay on overtime, which anyone that runs a staffing agency knows that that's not a long-term solution for both crew safety and obviously the bottom line. So we've had to move a whole lot of folks to full-time just to cover the needs of Bennington, Shasberry, and Woodford. No one is actually, as far as actual workforce development, there are no agencies or organizations providing any type of initial EMS education in Southwest Vermont. We are that entity. Now that does cut both ways. You know, it's great because we can build and develop our own folks. As you can imagine, though, it becomes a heavy lift on the other side, making sure that you're providing high-quality accredited education, make sure that you have that resource available. And as you guys saw, you probably saw in the paper and through our big marketing efforts, one of the things that we actually had to get to this year was actually an apprenticeship program. So years ago, back when EMS agencies were volunteer, you usually had a sort of a cadre of folks ready to step up into full-time jobs. That is no longer the case. We worked with the Department of Labor and a lot of the supporting agencies around and actually developed an apprenticeship program where we're able to hire these folks right out of the street into full-time jobs, submit them right to class, put them through a training program, and hopefully by April, May, these folks will be cleared EMS providers providing services for Bennington and Shasberry and Woodford. In addition to workforce, the board spent a lot of time this past year on our finances, as you guys can probably imagine. They did approve a spending policy, which allows us to take, 5% averaged over the last 12 quarters of our actual endowment, as far as we're putting that right back into operations. We put out basically an RFP looking at investment firms, looking at the people that manage our investments. We actually brought in, I believe Brian talked to nearly 10 different agencies, and we actually interviewed 4 over the course of the summer, making sure that we're uncovering, flipping over every rock, looking over anything, and doing our due diligence.
And the 4 did written proposals.
Yeah. We did implement, I'm calling it the Carroll Plan.
What was his name?
Huh?
Carroll Plan?
The Carroll Plan. We did implement the Carroll Plan, starting to we're not sending bills to patients that that we do not transport, but we're sending donation requests when we respond to them. Unfortunately, so far yet, it's horribly expensive. We made $100, and it's cost about 400 and some to implement that program.
Why did you not go toward billing?
Because we think it's a fundamental, because we're a public service, and because if you look at the backside of that, like, what's our recourse? Like, we're not going to deny care. So if you call me 3 times in a week and you don't pay, and you call me the 4th time, like, we're not going to not come to you.
I understand, but as I argued well over a year ago, when you get a bill, I think anybody with any sense of moral character is going to feel a little bit guilty if they don't pay that.
Well, so far it's been, like I said, we got $100 out of it. I think it gets down to the fundamental sort of mission of why we're here, and our board had a long discussion about that. But they did implement, we are going down that path of asking anyone that does not go to the hospital for a donation and explaining the fact that we don't get paid for those types of bills.
Well, I'd rather not have my name attached to that.
I know, that was an internal monkey, I apologize. Right. We did our annual appeal. We did one of the things that we've also done over the last couple of years, a few years ago, we started actually providing billing services for other EMS agencies. That's been a budget positive thing for us. Over the last 2 years ago, we actually started providing staffing services for other agencies, which allows us to offset overhead costs at Bennington Rescue by staffing other EMS agencies. And then this past year,
I would add that that's kind of trying to obtain efficiencies of scale by doing these services. In effect, we're somewhat integrating operations, which is good for the taxpayers here as well as those other areas. Mm-hmm. So it's a real positive thing, but it's not a formal integration, much like Act 46, but it is somewhat of an integration to try to help the economics of both agencies.
And then we started providing management services for other agencies, so sort of what Brian was saying. The complexities of these EMS, of running an EMS agency, and especially in today's healthcare environment, it's complicated and there's a lot of complexities to it. So that's another revenue stream for us that has been very successful. We talk about, we mention all the time about how insurances, and declining reimbursement or decreasing reimbursement. And just to show you, I pulled up an example. We got a notice from one of our insurance payers the last week of December, and they did raise rates for 2019. They went up 14 cents. So in 2019, we'll get 14 more cents for every patient that we transfer versus 2018. Just to talk about that. We took Stu's advice, and instead of buying a lot of our things with cash, we actually started doing some financing to sort of level fund year to year. And one of the things we did with that is went to the 14 banks and credit unions within a X radius of here and got them all to compete for our business, which was a nice thing. It's also going to level out expenses going forward. And then the last thing is that our communities and our patients are first. So since the towns all sort of stepped up to the plate, one of the things that we don't do anymore is, something we don't do, is we don't take that last ambulance out of service. So, any of us in Business School 101 or Accounting 101 is, somebody calls you for business, you're selling pizzas, you say, okay, great, I'll go do that, and make the money. However, I'm assuming this board and the Shasbury board and the Woodford board, if we're taking a trip to Albany, one of our ambulances, which is something we do very frequently, and we have another ambulance that needs to take a patient back to one of the local nursing homes, but then you decide to have chest pain or get into a car wreck at that point, that doesn't leave that resource available for you. So one of the things, one of our Bennington Rescue's commitment is that because the towns have stepped up, one of the things that there's always at least that first ambulance available for that first call. And then the last piece is that medical necessity is getting harder and harder to justify. Throughout my career, if you called 911 and an ambulance came and showed up and took you to the hospital, that was something that was reimbursable. It's the evolution of medical care now is that if you call for, let's just call them non-critical things. Let's pretend that you call for thumb pain, and we take you to the, you called us, we're a public service, we take you to the hospital. There's a very high likelihood, and there's an increasing likelihood that your insurers will deny that, which is that's a new thing that's sort of evolved over the last couple of years. So all that to say, our request only went up to $14,000 this year compared to our request from last year, and at the $12.13 or the $12.86, I still think is a very, very good benefit to have the availability of EMS services in town.
Couple starting questions. You touched on a couple of them already for us.
Yeah.
Patient revenue, significant drop, 271,000. Could you just...
Where are you at, Tom?
I'm sorry, it's on the actual budget.
Budget to actual.
Yeah, budget to
Budget for
budget.
18.
Budget, yeah.
Okay. Some of that is volume related. So our, if you look on the back side of your sheet there, our 911 volume went up, which is good in some
Forrest,
respects.
I'm sorry.
Wait.
We were handed this today. We have this in our packet.
Yeah,
What are you talking about?
So we wanted to give you the most up to date with 2018 finals. So or projected was as much December information as possible. So this is the one that I gave you today is probably...
It's on the back side. There's call volumes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 911 call volumes are up about 3%, which is nice in as far as from a volume standpoint, not from a public need standpoint. But the transfer volume is still declining slightly, and a lot of that is because we do turn down business. And it's one of those things where if we turn something down, it's not going to be there in an hour or 2 hours for us to pick up. They're going to...
When you say turn down, that's not like, oh, we're just disregarding. It's a turn down for a reason.
Yes, So using that previous example, Tom?
Yeah.
So we have an ambulance on the way to Albany, and let's pretend that the hospital calls and says, we have a patient that needs to go from our medical facility to CLR, which is literally across the parking lot. Because we won't take that last ambulance out of service, and then the hospital wants to move that patient, they'll call another agency, they'll call a competitor.
Okay. I guess that, the simple is just get the patient, they can wait where they're waiting and then
Yeah.
get that call out. But, easier to be said than done, I know. Okay.
So that's all I have. I'll answer any questions.
I also wanted to point out that the contractual allowances, this goes to the point of medical necessity now being the basis for which more and more payers of services are using to deny claims that formerly they would have covered. So you see, actually, it's not on the revenue side that the 2018 numbers were off. It's really on the contractual side, the contractual allowances.
Forrest, what's the total dollar amount of the rescue squad's endowment?
It's down pretty significantly right now. I think it's about 3.3.
Yeah, I was going to say 3.3.
3.3. And you have stock market, or stocks, right?
Yes, there's some other fixed income, but it's primarily stocks, largely.
You must have done pretty well this year, except for the last 6 or 7 weeks.
No, if you actually look at the projected numbers, we're actually down 158,000.
Over what period? Was that over the year?
That was actually through November.
Through November.
Yeah, so
Whatever.
December was, it was not a good year in the markets.
Yeah, everything tanked. And I've got to go back to, sending bills to people. Yeah, I'm going to insist on it because otherwise I'm not going to vote for this. I really am not. You can at least ask people to pay a bill. And if they've got just a little bit of conscience, they may not make that call, especially when it's frivolous. Because, the expense is ridiculous. And you're coming to us hat in hand when you haven't addressed it. And I'm not going to vote for this.
Okay.
I'm telling you. The other thing, what's this story about expanding into Hoosick Falls and maybe then risking not being able to answer a call in Bennington?
That's not accurate. So the first thing, Jim, is that I will, and I think that's a fundamental question you're about to come and chat with our board, because we've had that discussion. And the one thing that I want folks in the public to know is that we don't want to, and you hit perfectly on it, we don't want to discourage the public calling for help.
Of course not.
That's exactly what you don't want. You don't want the new mother with a febrile child at 10 or 11 o'clock at
Absolutely
night.
not. I'm talking about frivolous things. I've got a headache or I've twisted my ankle.
But the general public, Jim, doesn't necessarily know that. They don't know what is an emergency to me.
Here's your opportunity to tell them.
And I will tell you that our board, after the,
He's answering, let him finish.
after our conversation with you this fall, I went back to our board and we said, and I discussed your concerns. And we had a very frank discussion about this. And we think that the fundamental mission of Bennington Rescue is to provide the service. We are now asking for, we're reaching out to every patient on a monthly basis that calls us and does not transport, and we're saying, hey, this costs a thing, you should think about giving us money. We're not actually billing them because it's, you're adding a whole other process on the backside. So I think we're meeting the requirements of at least in spirit and as effort as far as what you want.
Let me make a suggestion, if I can. Rather than, the overall cost of doing a mailing, and all that filing, you could just as easily go to their house with a form and tick off a price for whatever it is you're providing and hand them the bill.
You can't do it. It's illegal. But anyway, we've got to move along because that you cannot get in touch with someone as you're delivering the medical service. They would be paying significant insurance policies, premiums to get that kind of coverage, which is not existing. So that's not a practical response.
It's the same. We operate under the same sort of auspices that if you show up at the emergency department right now with 0 complaints and you said, I want to be seen, they have to see you and provide a medical evaluation. We operate under that same.
Under EMTALA.
So
let's stay. I think we've covered that
But
part.
could I just put a resolution to this? I do think you heard from us last year and the year before loud and clear that we wanted to hear something on billing. And I appreciate that your board has worked really hard on this and spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we're not getting the benefit of that thinking in a very short, superficial meeting like this. I do agree that there's probably a very complicated, nuanced case for your decision, and I'd love to see I don't know if it could be a memo or if it could be something from your board, but I'd love to see in time some sort of piece on why they feel that's the case. And I don't mean to make more work for anybody, but I do think that it's one of those issues that is probably more complicated than it appears, and I'd like to know the full thinking of your board. And I say that with all positivity. I imagine that you've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think we would benefit from a sort of deeper dive into what you're thinking there. So
Anything you guys want, absolutely.
at your leisure.
Yeah. No, we'll work on that over the next month.
Okay, this is, again, a very small part of this.
Yes.
And I don't want to spend any more time on that part. Let's talk about,
I wanted to finish, can I answer the second part of this
I was
question?
just going to say, let's get to the question of whether or not
So
you're going
I
out
think
of service.
there's probably some misconceptions about some of the staffing and management services that we provide to our clients. There's not Bennington Rescue resources going out into other communities as an actual prospective thing. Other EMS agencies are contracting with us to provide staffing. So if I have a couple of EMTs that may be licensed in another state, go over and provide staffing when that agency can't, and then they pay a base fee plus administrative costs over that for us to provide that service. Agencies that we bill for, we provide the medical billing, coding, sending out all the businesses. They provide, we send them a bill for our services, the fees over that, administrative costs, all that type of thing. All those things are budget positive. That's us trying to solve our own problem. Management services, same thing. We have a team of excellent leaders and managers at our organization, and one of the things of us trying to solve our own problem is that we are, those agencies can't provide those services, or they're not doing so in an effective or efficient manner. So their boards contract with us, we provide that service to them, and it's a budget positive thing for us. Both communities benefit. Now, there could be some confusion about some of the mutual aid that you hear. So just like mutual aid is a thing where there's a point in time, like right now, if 7 people in Bennington all call 911, I don't have enough ambulances to answer all of those. So yeah, a Pownell or a Bennington, or an Arlington ambulance would come over here. Same thing happens in Eastern Rensselaer County. They run out of ambulances, they send an ambulance from Albany, they send an ambulance from Bennington. That's the way it works. Same thing with the recent shooting in Arlington. State police had 2 officers, but Bennington, the Sheriff's Department, Manchester all sent cops because they didn't have enough resources to handle that. I think sometimes people see they hear mutual aid and realizing that that's that it goes both ways. There are times when our demand exceeds our supply, just like those communities sometimes their demands exceeds their supply.
In this providing services, the board has been exceptionally careful to ensure that that inures to the benefits of this area, so that the taxpayers in Woodford, Shaftesbury, and Bennington are not subsidizing care in another jurisdiction.
Did I answer all your stuff, Tim? I mean,
It's confusing.
It is.
But I think the bottom line is, are the Bennington residents assured of emergency response by your organization any different than what we would have
24/7,
expected?
365, we're here. Any building client, so any staffing services that we provide to our EMS agencies, the only way that we can actually guarantee staffing is if they have to give us 8 weeks' notice. So it's not a thing where if client A calls and says, hey, we have a need for EMTs tomorrow, and we're already fully staffed and we don't have extra people to send over there, we don't cut our resources to send over there. That's not there has to be, there's a couple month lead time before we provide any type of guaranteed services.
Are there situations, though, where you're not able to respond to the emergency situation in Bennington because you're dealing with a Rensselaer issue?
That could happen at any time, yeah.
But does it happen enough? Does it happen enough so that it becomes more of a concern than it is
I think it's in the appropriate, I haven't seen an uptick in it.
If you didn't have this concept of mutual aid among the agencies, the cost per jurisdiction would skyrocket, because everybody would have to have far more excess resources if they wanted to ensure that every single call in that jurisdiction could be covered within that jurisdiction. The cost would skyrocket. So that's part of the reason for the need. Plus, we already have a staffing issue, which we're able to work through, given our apprenticeship program. But other agencies that are smaller even have even more dire issues on the staffing side.
I've got to be honest with you, that I just find it troubling. I understand the concept and the altruistic nature of doing mutual aid, but when there's nothing left in Bennington, should you get a call, boy, that really, and wait a minute, I'm not done.
Yeah.
When taxpayers are helping foot your annual bill, boy, that just really rubs me the wrong way.
So the one caveat to that, Jim, is that, so we do, there's a couple things. One is, let's use Rensselaer County as an example. When Rensselaer County calls for a paramedic, and they call for a paramedic only, and we only have one paramedic, we don't send them. The only time that we actually do go is when there's a mutual aid request, which means that there's a patient somewhere within a reasonable time frame of here that doesn't have an ambulance going towards it. And the other thing too is that, remember that that's one example, but keep in mind that we could be out on 3 calls in Bennington, and there's a 4th call, all happening in the same hour. That same argument could be made by the folks in Powell.
But you're serving the people of Bennington. That's the important point here.
Absolutely. But same thing. At a certain point in time, the 4th ambulance might need to come from a Pownell or an Arlington just because of the time of day or day of week or what have you. And that select board could have the same thing, say, screw Bennington, we're not going to send them any resources. We need to keep our ambulance available for Pownell.
And as far as that goes with Arlington or Wilmington or whatever,
Yeah.
is there any kind of financial reciprocity, or is it just,
yes,
you know?
Yes, if we provide ALS services and that's something that we did after the last time we came and talked to you. So keep in mind that any patients that any agencies that we provide ALS services for,
Advanced life support.
Thank you. Right. Advanced life support services for, we're now in a contractual relationship where the agency gets a bill for our services.
Okay. And vice versa?
Not usually, because nobody provides us ALS. We're your ALS resource in Southwest Vermont.
Right.
Nobody else has the level of care that we do.
So that sounds like a pretty good deal for the rescue squad.
Now, the other thing that we did is last year is that, or the last time I came and talked to you folks, is that we sent letters to everyone in all the primary towns in eastern Rensselaer County, to Pownell, to Arlington, to Wilmington, all the major folks, all the major towns, governing bodies, and town administrators or mayors, whatever their governmental body was. And we said, our select board's now paying for us. We will still respond to mutual aid because that's what EMS is here for. We will respond. If there's this discrepancy where we're coming over and a patient is not paying, or it's a non-billable call, that the town is going to be on the hook for that. And there were some really interesting conversations with some Tom Jacobs on the other side of the line that I had about, what is this for? What are you talking about? And the thing was that I said, well, what you're saying to us. I said, stop calling us. And they're like, well, hold on. You're our only resource. And I said, correct.
Pay for it.
Pay for it. And once we had that discussion, then it became more
They all eventually agreed.
They all agreed
Good.
that it was a vital. Good.
And
keep in mind, they're trying to solve their own problem. We're an end-game resource for them. But everything you guys have asked us to do, as far as I've put out ALS requests, we've got contracts with everyone. We're asking for donations. We told those towns in both Rensselaer County and around that if they lean on Bennington, they're getting billed. So and that's in effect right now, and it has been in effect now for a year.
If your donations, I've seen the budget, they've gone down over. Is this a conscious effort that your effort to acquire donations is not the major factor that it used to be?
Well, we do an annual appeal. We did have a couple of fundraising events. We tried to get some fundraising events started. However, looking at them retrospectively, they actually were costing us money by the time and effort to get them up and running. We're looking at some new things.
Also, we had a bequest, a sizable bequest. So we don't think that we should budget based upon repeating bequest, given that we don't have a history of that.
$8,900 one? Or is that something
Well, I thought there
different?
was 9,000, wasn't there?
Are you looking at the new one? Or
It says unexpected donation.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the old P&L
Yeah,
from November, we have two line items, as you guys can see in there. There's a fundraising letter, which is our annual request, and then everything from the in lieu ofs that we get in obituaries we do sometimes randomly get the, hey, great job, thank you so much for saving my XYZ, here's $100 or here's $35. We had somebody send us a $2.50 check as a thank you, but any of it all helps.
For clarification, to get it onto one page so it's more understandable, those two lines got merged together.
Yeah.
So that really, it's both in the donations lines. That $42,000 in actual donations for 2018 has some one-time contributions that are sizable that we do not believe that it's prudent to budget on for 2019.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Gene, let's start down your side. Do you have some?
I just have a question. On the goals, expectations, and challenges page, you cite obtain a CAPCE, and I understand what it is. Accreditation, does that cost money? And if it does, how much is it? And what will that do for the squad?
It's about $3,500. What that does, so we're already really close to that anyway. So I'll try to give you the short answer. Being in a tri-state area, all three have different governing bodies as far as their EMS agencies. So if I take a class put on by a Vermont EMS instructor, and I'm a Vermont licensed person, and I sit in a class for 8 hours or 4 hours or what have you, when I go to renew my paramedic license, that counts in Vermont. If I have a New York license, that education doesn't meet New York standards, so that 8 hours doesn't count across the border. And same thing with Massachusetts. So now that we're providing more and more education for folks, CAPCE accreditation allows us to supersede that to where any education that we offer is actually available. Any EMS agency nationwide can take our education. Obviously, we're not marketing to Oklahoma, but then what that does is open up a market for a revenue stream for us for Massachusetts and New York and the Albany area. The education we provide does count for New York licensure and does count for Massachusetts licensure.
So would that mean you could charge more because the class?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
That was a good answer.
Remember, we're already having these, we're already doing the education.
Right,
So we'll get the best bang for our buck once we can get a larger scale.
Okay.
And also that will burnish our reputation in terms of doing services. That makes sense, like management services to other agencies. I think that helps us as well. Reputation.
I think I may have asked this last year, and I apologize if I did, but when you're going to a call where it's a fall,
Yep.
and you're just probably going to be getting the person back up into bed or on a chair, do you have to take an ambulance? Could you take a van? I mean, I'm sure the cost would be much less rather than, but do you always have to be prepared for the worst-case scenario, so you have to bring an ambulance to every call?
Vermont doesn't have priority medical dispatching, so there's not in a lot of the bigger cities or bigger urban areas, or actually much of the U.S., there's a system that classifies medical calls based on a alphabetic scheme, sort of an Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. And based on the severity of the call, that's basically how fast your ambulance should try to get there. So the cardiac arrests are at the top of that, and I fell on the floor, I need help up, are at the very bottom of that. The cost is not in the vehicle or the delivery method. It's the fact that we could do that. We could take a person off an ambulance, put them in a vehicle, and they drive up and go and take care of that patient. The biggest problem is that we're paying for that ambulance to be on, and I have to have 2 people on to roll that ambulance. So
We've debated that at our board. It actually doesn't save any money.
Okay, that's the end of the, then that's
Sure.
fine. Okay.
The other piece of that too, Gene, is that it is, as soon as that person is picked up, then that crew is back available to respond to anything.
Oh, because
So-
they're in an ambulance.
They're in an ambulance, so if the
Gotcha.
call 20 seconds
Yep.
after that person gets picked up as a cardiac arrest, you're like, oh, well.
Still have to drive back.
you come
Yeah,
back,
yeah.
Plus, you never know what you're gonna get into.
I know,
Just because
yeah.
somebody calls and says they're falling and they just need to get
And they
up.
might be having chest pain when you get there.
Exactly.
Yep,
Well,
yep.
what made you
I've
fall?
had not in this area, but I was, as a young medic, I responded to a puncture wound to a chest, which, well, that's fine, no big deal. Show up and it was a gunshot. And it was just because of the caller.
That's different.
Caller said I had a puncture wound. Well, they did, but it was from a gunshot. So dispatch information is as good as the caller gives to the dispatcher, and then the dispatcher gives, if you call and say, I got a puncture wound, you're going to dispatch an ambulance for a puncture wound.
Right.
And we show up and see it's something different.
The other question I have is, I'm sure you're not alone with these financial troubles. I'm sure many, many EMS or rescue squads are dealing with this. So when you're collaborating at whatever workshops or whatever you're going to, do you talk about this? Is there any idea exchange or someone else who's had a tremendous success story that you could basically recreate here?
As far as efficiency of services and the agencies looking at, like, as far as us, as diversification of services, looking at new revenue streams, digging into new stuff, a lot of the agencies in Vermont, a lot of the ones that I deal with, even some of the ones that are similar size, they're still solving, and I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back, they're still solving getting trucks out the door
Oh.
and a lot of their staffing problems.
Okay.
We're sort of paving the way of looking at new revenue streams, new things, to where a lot of them are asking me, tell me how you got into this EMS billing thing. And they haven't, there's a lot of conversation on a lot of operational things. I would say that the innovation is not great, but we try to generate conversation and have there's a district in Southwest Vermont of EMS agencies, and also like the Vermont Ambulance Association statewide meetings that I go to very frequently.
There's a real tension between Jim wanting an ambulance available only to my people versus the only way to solve economic problems
Is to
is
share.
creating greater efficiencies. So the management is shared. So that's the needle we're trying to thread. And it's complicated. And we think this model has proved quite useful for us without
you're
getting
bumping
to
up
the point
against
where
a-
you're fully consolidating with another agency. Then you have the complexities of the various jurisdictions agreeing on how much everybody is funding, what's the availability of ambulances in our area. But that's the exact tension that exists in the marketplace.
And you're bumping up against a broken
Right,
healthcare system.
right.
Thanks.
We got a 14% raise.
No questions.
Jim?
I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, and it frustrates me, Forrest, that you didn't even make a modest attempt at what I suggested well over a year ago in billing these people. And I think you haven't even tried, so you don't know what the results
They have. I think they tried. They are
They've
trying.
asked for donations, they haven't billed anybody. Now,
The
we'll
the amount
support
of
this.
resources that it takes to bill somebody, as Tom said, I mean, there's legal ways we have to go about billing them, and the amount of
I
money-
understand, but you don't have to do this in perpetuity, you can at least try it.
So thank you for a higher level of information that you brought to us this year financially than last year. I really appreciate the extra effort that you went through. We do spend a lot of time pouring through these things, contrary to what people might think, and it's very, very difficult to really know what some of these numbers mean. I don't want to put you on the spot, Stuart, I might in a minute though. One of the people in this room that sort of consistently runs the tightest budgets year after year after year, often coming in under the level of inflation, is Stuart. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this budget, but I can imagine that if this was a town service, that a lot of this would be getting quite a lot of scrutiny, and I'd be interested in your thoughts in just a minute, Stuart, about this. But before we go there, One of the things that we, of course, talked about in the past was the capital, is the endowment that you have. And so I'm just backing out from your 5% number here. I assume that the spending policy allowance allows for 5% of capital to be drawn, not just interest. Is that capital?
That is correct. It's actually if you take the balance of the long-term investments at the end of each of 12 quarters,
yeah,
the average balance times 5%. So there's a level, that's a very common formula.
Yeah, right.
But it's all inclusive.
So you're budgeting for no interest income next year in that, off of that endowment?
Correct. It's all in the spending policy. That's part of the investment return down that would be shown below, ultimately in the financial statements.
That's not budgeted, right?
Correct. I mean,
Right.
and that's the norm. Nobody can predict the
Right.
markets, but everything else would go in that bucket of long-term and the investment return on the long-term investments.
Okay. Well,
Then the spending policy comes up to the operation.
Yeah, I don't see it listed here, but backing out from your spending policy allowance, it looks like you have something like a $3.1 million endowment at this point. Is that right?
Well, that's the average over the 12 quarters.
Yes, right,
Yeah.
the average.
At 5%.
Right, yeah, at 5%, okay. Okay.
But Donald, remember that the spending policy is for our operating budget.
Right.
Not for our capital.
Right. So I imagine.
We still have, there's a whole nother part of this.
Yeah.
That's all internal, is, ambulances and monitors and stretchers and load systems.
Yeah, and
That.
so some of that is meant to be for vehicles and whatnot, right? Some of the endowment? The capital?
No, none of it, actually.
None of that, okay.
I did want to point out something for the information of the board. The staffing issue is very severe. The conversion of part-time workers, which is not a model the agency can rely on anymore, to full-time does have some cost. So, basically in the benefits line. But that's the only way that we're going to solve this issue and crisis in terms of staffing and vacancies, is to get ahead of it with this apprenticeship program. You see some cost in there. That budget anticipates that we're going to have to go quite significantly still into the endowment to make that budget. So even at 220, and the rationale last year for lowering the request down was that you had a great year in the market, the town needs to kind of rely you to use more of that,
right,
to rely upon that. Well, fine, and then we see what happens. Now we have a down year, and the value is going to decline, and the budget that we have is still going to require us to go, even at the 220, is going to require us to go quite significantly beyond the spending policy into the endowment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
just to point that out to people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think the new spending policy is good. That it allows you to, I know,
Right.
So it's difficult because you're not a town department. You're a freestanding entity, so we do want you to have some self-insurance, but the question of how much self-insurance do you need to have?
Correct, and the spending policy is a guide. As we discussed last year, it is technically unrestricted, but it's really all we have as savings for the agency.
Right, right. So just to be clear, there on this piece, item, it looks like the request is 220 to the town, but your budget, the request is 185.
No. So keep in mind that your guys' budget is fiscal, and the one on the budget in here, you guys see the 185 or whatever?
Yeah.
Remember, that's 12 months of, or excuse me, that's 6 months of 207,459 and 6 months of 150.
Remember, this is accrual basis.
Right,
We're a
different
calendar
fiscal
year
years, yep.
budget, and we're going to debate at the board if it makes sense to move our year end to June 30th, so we can avoid this issue, so it looks a little clearer.
It's really confusing.
Well, especially if we're thinking more and more of us as being close to municipal services, it's really hard to have it on a different budget.
partial.
Yeah, so.
Right, but there's some cost to change that year end.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It'd be a good thing to have you analyze, though, just in the way that you've analyzed some of the billing stuff, so. Go ahead.
Brian Murphy, can you explain that a little bit better to them about?
Oh, sure, of course.
What's the
January
actual
1st.
increase?
The increase is was from 150 to 220, but the increase that we saw last year was 207, which is what the town had, taxpayers had approved for the year before.
Right.
And last year, we had a very good year in, going back to 2017, was a good year in the markets, unexpectedly good, particularly good. And so there was a large increase in that. And so the collective judgment was use some of that this year because the town can't take huge swings in the tax. We understand that. So only 150 was approved for the squad. But the request here is just taking the 207 and putting on a normalized minor amount of inflation on that. Is how you get to the 220. Because there was talk of trying to migrate us back to where we should be, because as you can see, it doesn't still cover what we probably need to do on the capital equipment side.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because I was feeling like I was going to ask, like, can you just start at the beginning? So that's very helpful. So the 70,000 increase for this year, I mean, so I've been trying to figure out where that is in here, and and if you needed to do the 3-minute elevator speech about $70,000 increase, is the answer to that the stock market, or is the answer to that, you know?
The answer to that is staffing, in terms of trying to solve the staffing crisis and converting people from part-time per diem, which what you don't realize is, much like North Bennington, I actually agreed with those comments that if they became a branch library, it might actually cost more to convert some of those positions to full-time if that was the result. In this case, we've had for years the luxury, while they were trying to work through all the other issues in the world of EMS agencies, they had the benefit of using per diem workers that were not getting benefits. And so, but we're realizing with the vacancies that we have to move to the model of getting full-time employees, and we're growing our own through the apprenticeship program. But the pay and moving some of the salaries up to, I almost think the salaries for EMS service providers is just laughable, frankly, for given what the education they have to go through and the certifications, and hence there's been problems having people enter into the profession.
Brian, if in fact the market was good, okay, you didn't have the was it 185? I can't remember, the 158. 158. But you're also gearing up on the other side with the staffing in order to be getting into the management services area, plus being responsive to increasing the rosters. What you're asking right now is that we have not a perfect storm, but we have a storm.
Yeah.
And what we're, rather than go into and violate our policy of 5%, you want.
Well, we still will violate the policy of 5%.
You're still going, yeah, exactly.
Right.
But you're asking maybe that violation will be less.
Right, the violation will be less.
No.
We're still on a path of using that endowment over the long term more than sustainable in the long run, so that the agency eventually doesn't become totally dependent on the town funding at one time.
Well, I just critiqued the North Bennington Library of that 15 minutes ago. I mean, the boards before the one that just presented to us did just what you're trying to avoid.
Right.
We spent down that endowment aggressively for operating budgets every year, and you guys are being mindful of it. Doesn't help, as Tom said, with the storm of you're off 158,000 versus last year where you were up. I forget the number you were up last year.
We were up like 400,000 or 500,000, I think.
So that's
right.
Yeah, it's a huge swing, Carson, you know.
And as we discussed last year, the spending policy is what just gives guidance. In our case, we're lucky that they're not permanently restricted funds.
Right.
But it just gives guidance to everybody collectively about what would be prudent to spend down. So, and actually, as the markets came back, a lot of educational institutions are well below 5%. But they're generally between 4% and 5%.
So, you know, I'm happy the apprenticeship program is working. That was a Workforce and Ed sponsored conference that kicked that off. Is there what's your sense of how many apprentices you will have yearly, and what does that flow look like? And also, what kinds of numbers are we talking about moving from part-time to full-time? I'm just trying to understand what this flow is.
So as far as the, stay tuned on the other thing. So we brought on 6 apprentices.
Okay, that's great.
And that, obviously, those are all 6 new full-time folks. Those folks are in class right now. They're in training 5 days a week. They will be testing in late February, and then they'll enter the field in March, and then hopefully, depending on, it's competency-based, as you know. So hopefully by late May, early June, they'll actually be providers out providing care for us. The current, we had this conversation with some of our staff not long ago. But doing proper succession planning, you know, we put the roster up on the board. Well, before we start this budget, we do the whole, is this person going to be here in a year or 2 years or whatever else? And you know, there's ones that are easy to identify. The ones that are in nursing school or are getting all their stuff from med school or you know, finishing out their architecture degree or whatever. Like, we know that there's a time, there's a timer on them. And the apprentices that we have now are going to fill us back to the staffing that we need. And I think we're going to see, one, how successful this program is if everybody completes it and gets through and gets certified and all that type of thing. We'll do another assessment midsummer. We're trying to, instead of having an intermittent sort of apprenticeship program, because of the way our training is, we're doing more cohorts. So probably mid to late summer. I think there's actually something, there's already a thing on my calendar to say apprenticeship for 2020 question mark. But it will determine whether or not it's a program that we will redo next fall, or basically the same time next year, depending on our current staffing needs. And if for some reason, if somebody moves to Bennington, you know, we still have our normal hiring processes, which are not fruitful, but we still have our normal hiring processes.
And so that's 16 full-time? What is the number?
6. We had 6 apprentices.
No, 6 apprentices, but what is the staffing?
We have 47 people working for us.
Yeah.
About 20, I think 23 or 24 are full-time.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have that number right in front of me.
No, but that's fine. Okay. And so...
The people that we do have right now, Jeannie, is the ones that are, any of the part-time or per diem staff that we have, they're not eligible or they don't want full-time. So they're the school teacher that works Saturday or Sunday afternoons for us, or you know, somebody that has another full-time gig somewhere else, and they're just picking up, you know, so we start to look at, well, we can just convert more people to full-time. Some of those folks don't necessarily want that. This is a side hustle for them.
Okay, thank you.
The budget does contemplate, there is a state subsidy because we structured it to frankly fall within that. The budget does contemplate the reimbursements back from the state from having an apprenticeship program.
Yeah, that's nice. Helps some.
Is that in one of the revenue from community education or revenue from EMS courses, or where's that?
It's probably, I don't know which one it's rolled up into. I'm sorry, Donald.
That's all right.
But it's in there somewhere.
It might be netted against the wages on hand.
Yeah. It's from the Department of Labor.
Yeah.
I just have one quick question, a couple comments. On your 2019 goals, expectations, and challenges, third bullet down, you have radio infrastructure.
Yeah.
And in the last week, we've heard from our highway department and the PD. So forgive my ignorance. Is this something you guys could piggyback on if we improve our highway?
I would love it. I think it would be fantastic.
I don't know if that would save on your costs or, I mean.
It would save on a lot. I think a bigger picture, emergency management in general, looking at radio infrastructure. You know, the police department, the 4 fire departments that we serve, the sheriff's department, us, the EMS agency around us, between them, there's 3 or 4 different dispatch centers. They're all using, they all have to worry about their own towers and their own repeaters and their own, the repeater that we have right now is on Carpenter Hill. Stu's been working with us, and Dan. We're trying to move ours up because it's getting ready to fail, and there's not a backup. And the fact that each EMS agency and each fire department has to worry about their own towers and their own radios and their own repeaters. A lot of the places you go around the country, that's either a county-based service, which I know Vermont doesn't have county-based services, or regional-based sort of systems that oversee and manage that. But I heard that conversation last week, and I was very excited about if there's economies of scale of figuring out how to have a better, more efficient, integrated, interoperable radio system, dispatch system, that would be fantastic.
And Chad and I spoke about this. We're not, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I'm not going to vote for putting in dollars to each individual budget until collectively everyone sits together and says, is there a process here that makes sense long-term? Because everybody asking for, I don't remember exact numbers, but 10,000, it just doesn't make sense unless it's a long-term plan. Chad and I spoke about this offline too. Everyone needs to roundtable before we do anything.
I'm down. I'm ready to sit down. Let's go.
Good.
That was my only question, but I know we had a quick conversation. I had the unfortunate incident of having to call for your services with one of my football players this year for a non-contact injury, and the professionalism, and just really grateful and impressed by your services. So,
awesome.
Thank you for that. And in a stressful situation, the demeanor of your employees were just fantastic. So,
awesome.
Thank you, and I wanted the public to hear that. People are putting their opinions in, so I'll put my opinion in. I agree with your board and the philosophical debate with billing. I know it will deter people in an emergency situation, in a life-threatening situation. I don't want someone second-guessing, can I afford this bill? I want them to call for services. So I agree with your board and support your board on that decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have another question, if I could jump in. Good comments, Chad. So if we kind of take this perfect storm approach, that you've got staffing, sort of a real hit from staffing costs this year, and compensation for your services from various places is down, and your endowment return is down. How much of a one-time thing is this? We don't have access to your capital replacement plan. I see that you want to work on that, but what's coming down the pike? Are we looking at expensive ambulance replacements next year? What's the next sort of equivalent of a ladder truck coming at us?
Well, we would like to hope that we're never going to have to come to this board for our capital expenditures. That's why our reserve fund, it's so important for us to keep our reserve fund, because that's what my board battles over so much, is everything costs so much. I mean, a stretcher and a load system costs more than the car you're driving. Never mind the ambulance that it goes in. We're hoping to never have to sit in front of this board and say, we need a new ambulance. We're doing all that in-house. That's why it's so important for us not to use up our reserve fund for our operating expense. I mean, that is really the bottom line. If we can operate on a year-to-year basis at a zero balance, it would be wonderful. And then let the organization worry about how we're going to do vehicle replacements and equipment replacement. Which we've done. We've gone to leasing certain equipment, financing ambulances. We took Stu's advice, and which makes it a lot easier for us to budget, and it makes it a lot easier for us to pay for, and we're not raping our reserve fund every 18 months for an ambulance. So hopefully, to answer your question, we're just going to be back for help with our operating expense and not a capital expense.
Yeah, okay, so when you say, the phrases you're using, reserve fund and whatnot, is that the same as endowment, or the roughly 3.1, 3.3 million is what you'd like to use for replacement of equipment, big building expenses and things like that? So, okay, great. And so this one line that talks about vehicles, this is what, oil changes and vehicle maintenance? That's not vehicle replacements?
Vehicle maintenance in there, and there's fuel in there.
Okay, so that's just
That's it, yes. No capital.
Okay.
Any other?
So but just the last kind of
point on.
Great that capital expenses or capital plan would be rolled into the reserve fund. That's great, and we'd love to see you continue that. But what if we went with this budget in terms of these three things that are creating the perfect storm? Might we see some relief next year? Might we see a lower request come in?
I think there's always that possibility, but I think that like Jeannie said, the healthcare system itself is broken. Bennington, the That'd be fantastic. And if somehow we can fix the volume problem, we get a magic storm of anytime we have extra people, first of all, we only staff to the demand that we have. But we can fill that I hate to say slack time, but fill that available time with paying business, that would be a fantastic thing. But there's only so much of that you can do without cutting off your actual resources. The other piece, I had a good point, Donald.
Well, you're thinking about that for us.
Yeah.
Relative to the reimbursement side and the healthcare system being broken and really broken. Just no one wants to do anything about it, frankly. You've been talking. But editorial comment aside, if you have a patient that you pick up in Bennington and they're sent to Dartmouth, you don't get reimbursed to the level of that cost to you to get them from Bennington to Dartmouth because they should have gone to Albany.
Correct.
Because now the rules, as I come to understand, limit, you have to go to the closest tertiary care facility.
So insurers dictating our health care. So Tom Jacobs has a...
No, let's go Donald.
No. Jim.
So Donald has some sort of an injury that requires, let's just go with like a hand injury. You require a microsurgeon, which SVMT does not have. They're a great community hospital. They provide excellent life-saving care and a good variety of services. Having a hand surgeon is a specialty that is not something that SVMC has. Let's pretend that your entire family, you've done all of your care, everything you've done at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. We know that SVMC, sorry, I didn't mean to point you, but we know that SVMC has a relationship with Dartmouth. What the insurers say, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield, MVP, Medicare, Medicaid, whomever, they say, you're at SVMC, we see on our little thing here that there's a hand surgeon in Albany, which is an hour away and only 43 miles, and we see there's a hand surgeon at Dartmouth, you need to go to Albany. You're like, no, but I had a tennis injury 2 years ago, and this hand surgeon at Dartmouth did my surgery, and I really like him. And the insurance goes, that's great. You, Donald Campbell, with your hand injury, you're going to pay the difference between Albany and Dartmouth because we can get you taken care of over here. And that's just
And we do bill the difference, but we don't get it back frequently.
Goes through
and that's
patient revenue.
That's the dirty underside of healthcare billing.
So no real prospect for relief in terms of fixing any of these things then? Staffing maybe, but compensation unlikely and can't control.
I think unlikely. We're actually, the community here is at the very low end of what most communities are paying, even within Vermont, for EMS services. So it's been sheltered because of those investments. So it was a long time coming here and much longer than it was in other communities. I don't see the long-term trends changing, Don.
Did you offer us that information at some other point? I feel like I've seen it, but don't see it in
The
this.
per capita?
Yeah, what?
Yeah, you
other-
got it a couple weeks.
Yeah. During your fall presentation, maybe?
Yeah.
Is that when you, yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Again, the services that you provide in the professional way that you deliver them, to echo Chad's comments, it's, we're so fortunate as a community to have that. And we're looking to the future so that can be maintained, and really appreciate your thoughtfulness and concern about the community and also being able to assure the future with your reserve fund endowment to assure the community that you will be able to provide the professional services that you're providing. And thanks very much for the effort and the professional.
I did remember what I was going to say.
I thought you probably would. I was giving you that.
The no transport rate in Bennington actually went from, in 2017, went from 21%. In 2018, you went up to 24%. So almost 1 out of every 3 calls now in Bennington, or 1 out of every 4 we're not transporting. So it's slid up a little bit.
I see. And that's a trend line that's getting worse for you.
Yeah, well,
from a
there's
budget perspective.
even some of the, we're at the point now, and I know Chief Doucette was here last week, we're at the point now where even some of the ones like the opioid overdoses, you're waking those folks up or you're treating those and then they're saying, I'm not going to the hospital, or, they're
Right.
not.
So it goes uncompensated for you?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Not even a thing.
And some of that is actually saving a burden on other public resources. For example, in some areas, maybe the police are having to answer some of those calls. But the fact is that in our community, it's historically been Bennington Rescue.
That, the community is the thank you. I think, unfortunately, it's not transferred to dollars.
I threatened to put Stuart on the spot to ask him about this budget, but maybe we'll do that when we get to our budget deliberations.
Yeah, good. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, 10 minutes, please. We are reconvened, and we're going to look at the budget, a couple of budgets, recreation budget, and the remainder of the administrative budgets. I think we have those. Stu, do you want to probably lead us in that discussion?
Yes, the recreation budget, as you probably have seen, is really up only 0.5%, principally because we reduced the staff by one full-time position, recognizing that we have the management agreement with the Y, where we have an interim manager who is a Y employee, and we're actually paying them less than we would have paid for a full-time body with benefits. So the budget is pretty much level funded and no major increase, principally due to this management agreement that we have. And I should state for the public here, because it's running wild on certain social media sites, the town is not looking to sell the rec center to the Y. The town will continue to own the rec center on infinitum. It's just ludicrous, the stuff that is being thrown around out there. But that's what people like to do. There's no truth or no basis for it. But nonetheless, what we're trying to do is improve the programs and improve the things that the town can offer, and the Y gives us that opportunity. This board has talked about expanding the recreation center to bring a gymnasium and other amenities to that particular building, and I just think it's crazy that people think somehow we're going to be selling that building off to the YMCA. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So
it could well be, could well be encumbered or limited. I'm not sure about the deeds to the Y, whether or not.
Well, I know certain of our recreational lands are encumbered in that way by deed. I'm not sure that the entire Morgan Springs site is that way, but
no, that's probably an aside for another day.
There was one other issue that was brought up on social media, and I'd like Stu to address.
Relative to the Y?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is, once the Y takes over the temporary management, it's not permanent, that fees are going to just explode exponentially.
Well, in this year, in the management year, there will be no increase in fees for anyone who is joining or a member of the current rec center. Is it possible that fees may rise in the future should this become a permanent partnership? That's a possibility, but I tell people that, look, we have a budget of over $600,000 for recreation uses. I think going into the future, the town has the potential to continue to subsidize fees at the recreation center if it in fact becomes a permanent management entity of the Y. We can continue to make the use of this center affordable for the people of Bennington. I don't think that's an issue at all.
Yeah. And there would be a process before this even happens relative to a long-term management agreement if we entered into that. Right now, we have a 1-year, 6-month evaluation. She's going to be presenting.
I think we do the evaluation in September.
Yeah.
So it's actually a 9-month period. But we're a whole 10 days into our management agreement, and it seems right now, at least according to Jess, it's going very, very well.
It's, part of this, and a couple of us are interested in the senior citizen process administration coupling with the why discussion. Is there possible to have Jess review our senior center operations, et cetera, see if...
We're actually having those conversations right now with Jess and with the why to see whether or not there is a way to couple moving forward. And hopefully we'll find some common ground there. And anything, of course, that changes what we do, we'll come back to you and be presented to you.
Because, we keep putting money into this old, besides the programs, I'm sorry, but the building maintenance, and I think there's a $40,000
roof replacement, yes.
Yeah. That just seems to be like almost penny wise, pound foolish. We have to keep putting $40,000 for the next couple of years into a building that we really want to get away from, because for a lot of reasons. So, is there anything more you want to add to that, or we'll just ask?
Well, I think that's the recreation budget. Okay. It's pretty much level funded. The other considerations for the remaining administrative budgets, yes, there is a project to replace the shingles on the senior center building. We originally were looking at replacing it with slate, which is what the roof is now. I asked my staff to take a look at regular shingles, and we have reduced that, pretty much cut that project in half. The unfortunate part is it's a very big building, and it's a very expensive project, and that is budgeted at $40,000 this year, and more than likely $40,000 next year. The other major increase in the administrative budgets is the addition of personnel in the Buildings and Grounds Division. We have proposed adding one person. The request was actually for two, but I indicated to folks that we probably couldn't afford to do that this year. But the concern here is that we're building all of these new parks. We're adding now public restrooms to the Merchants Park. We're not going to be able to continue to maintain these things at a higher level unless we add some staff to the Buildings and Grounds Division. And so that's why that request is there, and it is there for your consideration. And other than that, there's really not a major change that we can control. Our insurance costs went up less than last year, but they went up again this year, both property and casualty and workers' comp, but not as dramatically as last year. And we are seeing an increase in our life and disability insurance. We've just come off a long-term rate lock policy that Michelle negotiates, and this is a new policy, so we're going to see a jump this year, but we also negotiated another 3-year rate lock on that particular policy. 2-year rate lock. So yes, we'll see a jump this year, but then it should be level next year. So those things we can't control.
Yeah.
But the things that we can,
are there.
I think we've highlighted. And
why don't we talk about those? Do folks have reactions or questions relative to those? And why don't we just stay within the context of the rec?
Start with rec?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So why don't I go, Jean?
Yeah, I just think that the situation we're in right now, both in terms of working with the Y and having sort of senior staff positions open at both the senior center and the rec center building, and just I think the steps forward we've made in terms of thinking about the recreation budget, parks, buildings, staffing, all being one that we want to I guess, to pull together. It feels like this budget's confusing to me. In talking with YMCA staff, it sounds like they're very interested in thinking about services as one big service, young to old. So I guess I wish, and I had hoped, that the budget would not be broken out as, here's what we're doing for the rec center, building, staffing, supplies, programming. Here's what we're doing for the senior center, and doing that same sort of thing, because there is overlap. And I think the more we silo this, the harder it is for us to move away from seeing these things as completely discrete with budgets. And the budgets, I mean, there would have to be some savings if we started looking at integrated system, and that's where we want to go with the why. I mean, I understand they're putting a proposal, maybe they've already given you guys the proposal, but there's a proposal either you already have or you're getting Monday that looks at comprehensive services from seniors to
Yes,
toddlers? Is that,
I think we're meeting Tuesday.
okay, so you already have it, or you have the proposal, or it's coming?
Only in a draft format, but we need to sit down and understand exactly what the proposal is.
So it feels to me like what we're looking at is something different than what the Y is coming in saying, here's what we can do, soup to nuts. They're not looking at taking care of the parks, but they are looking at integrated services. And we have a lot of integrated services already. So this budget's hard for me to think about what our needs are, because it's siloed. So
It's early, it's what you're saying, without knowing what
Yeah.
the plan is.
yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're simply looking to take the administrative budget of the Senior Citizens Center, the 7,900 accounts, and move them into the 7,100 accounts of the Recreation Center, you're not necessarily going to see any savings, because the personnel costs are going to be the same. I did omit to reinforce that we had planned to hire a part-time person at the senior center, anticipating that the current director was going to retire in December of 2019. She has now decided to retire at the end of this month. So that makeup, that structure, potentially could change if, in fact, we find that there is a proposal from the Y that actually works for us.
Well, is there timing?
That wouldn't save us a lot of money, so that's an
Okay.
$11,000 expense.
Well, I think it's more, I guess I'm more interested in integrating of services, and then we'll see what that means in terms of funding. But it feels like we're at odds, because at the one moment, we're in negotiation, or there are conversations with the YMCA about how to provide integrated services, and yet we're looking at budgets that, in fact, don't do that.
Well, but you're still going to need staff.
Yeah.
In both locations. So accounting for it, and this is the structure we built the budget on. That structure may change. It won't change what the proposed budget is. It'll simply mean that perhaps in future years, once we understand what that new structure is, if there is a new structure, and how it works, then we can start talking about merging, because we'll know what we're dealing with. Right now, it's speculation, and I would just soon leave these budgets the way they are until we understand what the new form is, if there is a new form to come with it.
Okay.
I know you disagree.
It does feel, Jeannie, and I understand both points, and I think they're both legitimate, but it does feel like this particular year is a year of inquiry, and to Jim's point about what's on social media, I think people just need to suspend judgment for a little bit and give us a chance to kind of see if we might be able to do something better than what we have done. And I don't know how impatient people are feeling, but decisions are not being made at this point that we can't go back on. What we're looking for right now are opportunities to do better than we have done, offer more programs than we have, expand our recreational facilities, keep our budget down. These are all good inquiries, but we need a year to work it out. So what I can imagine that putting the senior center numbers in with the rec center numbers, the optics of that would be better in that that's how we think about it. We think about them both as being together. But for this particular year, I'm not sure it matters that much until we really figure out what the plan looks like and what the roadmap looks like for us.
And I don't disagree. I think my frustration is that this time last year, we talked exactly about this, and our decision was to use this following year to look at how we can better integrate these services. And I feel like we haven't moved forward on that. I think the Y may help us do that in the next year, but I think my frustration is that this was the discussion we had last year,
Yep.
and we
It's
have
slow.
not
Yep.
moved.
And if not for your impatience on this, we would not be moving recreational
Oh, thank you.
opportunities forward as quickly as we are. And I think it's good. You know, we need to balance our sort of impatience to get something done and do better with practical realities of people leaving and opportunities being formed and whatever. So I'm with you, Jeannie. I have two picky questions for you, Stuart, and they're almost not worth taking time on, but
Reference a line item.
it's a line item, 7160.
What page?
68, page 9.
You're on the rec center side?
Yeah, and it's on the rec center side. So we're just a repair and maintenance item. It looks like it's up $4,000. That's not a big number, but it is a little bit of a jump. Is that a hard number, or might that be something that could be?
Pull it out, hold on.
Okay, all right. I have one other like that and I probably should have asked you about this ahead of time,
No,
because
that's
these odd categories are difficult. Just by way of history, the actual was a little over 1,000 in 17, and the actual is a little over 2,000 in 18. And
Yeah, the major increase in that particular budget is monies to actually purchase paint to paint the Ross Pavilion,
okay,
which is an exterior maintenance issue for us.
okay. Paint is a legitimate expense. Upkeep is good. So while you've got that book out, I'm also wondering about, on page 10, this is senior citizens, but 7,900.56, and there's a $16,000 number in there. It doesn't look like much of it was spent, but that may have to do with where we are in the calendar year. It looks like we only spent about 3,000 of that so far, and I'm just wondering if we need to put that full 16,000 in there, if that could be a lower number.
Yeah, that's the program folks that we hire to present programs. Generally, it's considered to be reimbursable. It is offset in the revenue category with fees from the Senior Citizen Center.
Okay.
And it really does depend, I think, on how aggressive our programs are for a given year. But it's generally a wash.
A wash, okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm less concerned with it. And I guess my last question is, as we sort of figure out what we're doing with Senior Center versus the Recreation Center and how much we integrate them, either possibly physically, eventually maybe there's an opportunity to bring the two into the same plant. I'm not sure what would happen with the existing existing Senior Center, but is the roof so bad that we need to do it right now, that we will be jeopardizing our asset there, or could that wait for a year or two while we figure out whether or not we're getting rid of that building or whether or not we're going to keep that building?
I can't answer that question. I doubt that the roof is so bad that it couldn't go another year.
Or two.
But we're starting to see degradation. Because it is a slate roof, we're starting to lose slate. We're starting to see that kind of activity.
It's a good question.
Can you stretch it? More than likely. Unfortunately, Larry's not here to set me straight, but...
I'd love to hear more about that, at some point, but I'm not a fan of deferring maintenance to the point where it becomes more expensive. But given that we're in a year or two of transition, I guess I'd be interested in that.
Dan had his hand raised.
I have talked to Larry about this in the past, and it's not just an issue of damage to the building, but slates falling off the building and perhaps being a safety issue.
But
So
I think we can repair it, yeah.
So that, I know that that was mentioned by Larry. I'm not saying that, sky is falling, we got to do it tomorrow, but it was also not, in addition to the having to repair the slates regularly to keep the water from getting in the building, it was also that these things are coming off the roof in areas where they could hurt somebody.
Is it likely, I mean, if we no longer needed that building, would we be likely to, what would be the likely future of it?
Good question.
Well, right now, the meals program is our only tenant, and I imagine that given the investment they've made in kitchen equipment, they would most likely like to stay there. Whether or not the meals program could afford to buy the building from us and maintain it, that is a question I can't answer. But that would be the likely scenario if we were to suddenly find ourselves with an opportunity to move out of that building and consolidate. We would probably look to sell it to someone else.
Okay, well, maybe we could get a little more information from Larry before we make a final decision on that. That does seem like a number that might be able to wait a year or two.
Yes. That would be $80,000 versus 40.
Over 2 years,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Jim? Nothing? Carson?
Donald, I applaud you on that roof observation.
You're cheaper than I am.
I just, it was the only number that kind of stood out. I mean, you put it on the highlights right away. I mean, if the long-term plan is to, even if we don't sell it, you're going to have enough tenant space there. Meals on Wheels has made a really long-term commitment in infrastructure. I mean, we could have, as long as Larry doesn't say it's impossible.
Roof's falling in.
We need to find some big cuts, and that's the only one that really jumped off the page on what looks like a level budget for the most part to me.
Gene?
I just had a question. What is on page 9, the recreation pathway? Is that the one on Kosher Drive? Is that the one from Applegate to Molly Stark? I just was unclear what that actually was.
That is the Ninja Path.
Okay.
That's the one that runs from Bennington Station all the way out to North Bennington.
Okay, it's part of the Ninja. All right, that's the only question.
Then let's go back to the, I guess, that portion of the building and grounds. There's a suggestion, request for one additional position on that. I guess my reaction to that, Stu, is when I saw it, like, a lot of these projects haven't come off. We're working on them. I'm hesitant about recommending another position being put in place now. I'd rather get everything up and running and then decide how much coverage or lack of coverage we need. I know it's nice to be proactive, but I just hate to have to hire another position. Maybe we can figure some way to use the existing workforce to cover.
Or share across.
Or something, yeah.
Well, I
just, I don't know, it's like, understand, like, let's be ready for when these go online, and we're going to be maintaining them.
Theoretically, the Merchants Park is going online, the Splash Pad Park is going online this coming year. This budget starts in July. That park should be finished. And we're going to be introducing public bathrooms to the community. That's going to be a maintenance issue. We're introducing a splash pad, which is going to have to be maintained because it is a water feature that invites people into it. So we're going to have to make sure that we're keeping the water that is there clean. So that's going to be a daily maintenance issue, much as we chlorinate the water in the pool, much as we used to chlorinate the water in the Y Park, the Y Pond. We're going to have to do some of those kind of maintenance issues at the splash pad because that is water that will come in contact with human skin. So you're creating additional maintenance, probably first thing in the morning, to make sure that that park is ready to go for the day. And then you may have accidents during the day with public restrooms that have to be dealt with. And, I think Larry would tell you if he was here that our current maintenance staff is stretched.
Okay, that's my underlying question is, are they stretched? And if, that's my can't we do it with restructuring some of the internal responsibilities that the staff has? Because it's a pretty, how many folks are involved in building?
We have a working foreman and four others. So basically, five people are maintaining all of the current town facilities except the wastewater treatment facility, the public works facility, and the water infiltration plant. Those are maintained out of their own budgets. And we recently, as you know, brought on a half-time person at the public works facility to help maintain that at a higher level. Otherwise, we're maintaining all of the town facilities, parks, recreation, fire facility, police facility, town offices. Stark Street is coming online with additional effort this year if things go as we discussed. We're pushing it.
Well, and we've been putting a lot, this board has been very active in the last 5 years in particular to create new, fun things in Bennington. So Bloomsack Park is certainly new, Stark Street's going to be new, the splash pad's going to be new, the 336, I always get that number wrong, is going to be new. So we're asking a lot more of people, I get that, and we do not expect to be able to make Bennington better without having it cost something. So I do think this board is expecting to have to. We also don't want to in any way compromise the maintenance of these things. It doesn't do us any good to build a beautiful downtown attraction to get more people downtown and then have garbage around or have it unsafe or have it unclean or have graffiti around. So we will expect a high standard of cleanliness and maintenance.
And I totally agree, but my question posed is that this is an additional expense because of these upgrades. We haven't actually got those online, and many of the things we talk about getting online are delayed. This is an expense, a considerable one, and it's going to be in place and put in place for probably perpetuity. The underlying question is, why don't we see how we do, and then if it looks like it becomes an issue, then revisit it. I just hate to spend money. If we can restructure the existing staff for the interim, fine. But
I'm worried that if we don't have this when it opens, that'll get a negative reputation because it's not cleanliness if we can't meet the needs, and that'll deter people from wanting to go there. It'll give it that bad reputation, and our other facilities could fall as well. So it could affect Willow Park or other places. I'd hate to see that. If we have something new, we should keep it new for as long as we can at the beginning and not have it trend downward. I'd rather just add the staff and keep it looking nice and working well.
Is there any in-between step, Stuart? Is there anything in the middle, sort of a hiring part-time people to help us get through the first year and see how it goes? And next budget session, we'll have a little better fix on how many hours it takes to keep these things going?
I can't answer that. I know Larry's concern is that we will, in fact, fall behind, as Chad has talked about, that we will begin to defer maintenance on some of these places and some of the smaller spaces that people utilize.
Care about.
Because we can't get there. We just don't have the manpower.
How many more hours are you envisioning in this budget year for our staff working, who have been working on the water treatment plant, so saving us money up there?
I'm sure I understand the question.
So we had a significant amount of our town staff working on the wastewater treatment plant.
Yes.
And that was helping us save costs from hiring subcontractors.
Okay.
So where does that extra time go if they're not working on that project?
Well, we have 5 people out at the wastewater treatment facility that maintain the plant and maintain the sewer system. We were able to supplement that work with people from the highway division to help with in those times where we needed more manpower on site. So we weren't forced to go out and contract for those services. We were able to do it in-house. But I mean, that kind of sharing we really do all the time.
Has that work ceased out there? So is that project, as far as us doing the work, Has that kind of, is that done? Is that pending?
The RBC project is done, and it's certified complete. So folks have now moved into what we call the standard maintenance phase, making sure that they're operating properly, making sure that the plant operates properly, and maintaining the system. If you'll see them out in the middle of the roads pulling manholes and checking the manholes and making sure that the flows are accurate and the manholes are holding up and those kinds of things. So
Maybe some of those shared resources could be then sent back out if we have a shortfall in this upcoming year. We could utilize those hours that they were able to find when we needed them for the wastewater treatment plant, and then we have a plan B. So I understand Chad's concern. If we have a shiny new toy and it needs to be maintained, we want to keep it that way. But we also need to be mindful that this is a new staff member. When put in, it's hard to retract. So we did it once before, we likely could do it again.
Well, I don't know that.
Stuart, I'm sorry, I can't. I have to talk on this one, so.
No, that's the purpose of this discussion is
That's the
about.
highway department, they're going to be doing projects.
Yeah.
They're not going to be doing maintenance. Maintenance is day-to-day, every day. I would urge you, beg you, in fact, to cut somewhere else if you want to cut. We need this position. We need 2 positions. We're only going to asking for 1. If Larry were here, he would tell you that we just can't get to what we already have. We barely can meet the minimum right now. So if you want to cut something, I would just cut somewhere else.
Not to cut you off, because we do have to move through the discussion, but the essence of it is, if Larry or you say that we're at a manpower max right now with the responsibilities that we have, and anything more that we give them is not going to be a satisfactory response to our responsibilities to maintain the town, then I withdraw the concern, because it's a position that we have to fill. It's just the question was, can we do it with existing staff? And I hear they're pushed to the limit, can't do it. Let's not make it even worse, and then we're going to basically put at prejudice our future projects that we're.
And I understand the need to keep the budget low, so if we have to cut someplace else, I understand that, but this is one place where I think we just don't have.
Is there anything more we want to add on that one?
I have a question. Is the staff that takes care of the parks and so forth, are they turning in a lot of overtime hours, which if there was a hired position, a filled position, those overtime hours would disappear and it would offset a little bit?
Right now, we have scheduled overtime in those folks who service the recreation center, because we open the center on Sundays and Saturdays, whereas other facilities are basically closed on those days. So we've actually adjusted the schedule of the 2 employees that are now part of Buildings and Grounds, where one works a Monday through Friday schedule, the other works a Tuesday through Saturday schedule, but there is additional work that is required, because the parks are always open, the center is open for 4 or 5 hours on Sundays. So yes, there's scheduled overtime. We can't imagine that we could reduce that dramatically by adding another staff person, because I think Dan is hitting the nail on the head, that if we are currently stressed to the max, and we're making these kinds of adjustments to keep our facilities open and well-maintained, I'd sooner cut the roof out of the senior center, and I'd sooner cut the part-time person out of the senior center than lose that Buildings and Grounds person.
It might be worth at some point looking into private contracting on things like bathroom cleaning. As we get multiple facilities, that might be something that would work well. It's also something our staff.
That's a potential.
Yeah.
That's a potential, but,
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of small cleaning operations that do residential cleaning, that do some commercial cleaning. Is there anyone really specialized in bathroom cleaning? I don't know that. I haven't looked that way.
That's good. Those are all really good thoughts. I mean, that's part of our budgetary discussion. I appreciate the comments. I would suggest one place maybe to cut would be this additional pickup truck, another $44,000. Can we pick up or use what we have already?
Where are you now?
It's on the 830. Yep, Building and Grounds under 830. Page 5.
What page, Tom?
It's on page 3 of the narrative, and it's on page 5 of the
Yeah, that purchase is obviously tied to the increasing staff, and I don't know whether there's another option that might be available. I hadn't looked at that one really carefully. I dare say that we have one buildings and grounds vehicle at the present time.
Can we share resources again back with highway?
Because when you pick up a truck, you pick up more than just the cost of doing it, it's the maintenance and the everything else.
I understand. There again, I trying to think on my feet. I'm not sure what opportunities there would be for sharing of vehicles necessarily with other departments, but there might be some other way to deal with that if in fact we are getting rid of other vehicles due to their life. Maybe there's a way to transfer that vehicle for at least a short period of time, a year, to take a look at least get us through the hiring process and the application of the new position. Maybe that's a place as well.
Chad,
Well, that was my thought, if there was one of RJ's vehicles coming off lease that we could extend, or one that he was going to use for a trade-in, maintaining that for a year.
And there is, I know RJ plans to purchase, I think,
2 new trucks and a backhoe.
There you go, thank you.
we're talking about that, too.
You get there faster than I do. So, I mean, I suppose that's an opportunity. And I dare say that Larry would probably argue that the position is more important than the motor vehicle.
Mm-hmm. That came through loud and clear from yours and Dan. There's no... And to appreciate the candid nature of it. Are we going to be going into discussion on the economic community development and admin stuff, Stu, right?
Well, in the community development department, the only major increase there, other than salaries increases, is an increase of $10,000 in marketing monies, pushing that number to $20,000. I know we have a proposal being presented to us, and I don't know whether the board is planning to look at some grander plan for marketing, but recognize that, we increased it by 100% increase in that particular line, because in talking with Zerat, there was some energy out there among this group to do more marketing for the community, but I don't know what the plan is, and I don't know what specific numbers that they're going to be asking for, if any, but I imagine there's going to be a dollar amount tied to their proposal.
Sort of then comes to the question of, like, should we wait until we get the presentation and give that some dialogue? Because I would think, because I've heard numbers from 10 to 20 to 50 to 300 or 250,000, and it's like, it's all great, but we do have to develop a budget. But I think we're sort of acting without knowing all of what we really need, not just want. So maybe we could just hold off on that and revisit it after we have our conversation with the marketing presentation folks on Monday. The only other area in that section that is the Southern Vermont Development Zone effort. Maybe I have to understand, is that just been reserved and transferred over? We haven't spent...
We're setting aside, the board started this process 3 years ago when the SVEDs became really a potential. We know that at some point we're going to need to participate from a funding perspective in that Southern Vermont marketing effort and economic development effort. So we've been putting aside small amounts of money in reserve, and we increased it slightly this year to try to accelerate that, because if you read the paper this morning, it's becoming closer and closer to a reality.
That's interesting, because I was thinking when I first looked at this, this all we do is reserve and there's no reality, but I did read that same article this morning. Because if it doesn't look like there's going to be any real measuring or actually development, I'd hate to just keep putting money into this Southern Vermont marketing or developing strategy when we've got real needs right here in Bennington.
Yeah, well, I think the Southern Vermont strategy is really an economic development strategy, not necessarily a marketing strategy. And I think there's a difference.
Yeah, there is.
In how they function.
So are you breaking open the other parts of the budget at this point?
Yeah.
Comment.
Yeah, start under the admin side, yeah.
So Stuart, it's a general fund question, but we focus all the time on expense, but I have a couple of questions about revenue. One of them being on page 1, police special services, so 2,400, line 2,400. Is a $30,000 increase, is that really realistic, or is that something that we can count on?
Yes.
Okay.
That is, my finance director does the majority of our revenue projections, and if there is an increase there, it's because that is what we're seeing as far as income.
Is that going to be the same answer for interest earnings? It seems hard. That seems like a particularly hard number to kind of get at, but a $12,000 increase, either one of these numbers would kind of punch a hole in the budget if they didn't come through.
Yes, I think the interest earnings is really a very real number.
Okay. Then I guess the other question I had for you is page 3, 3430.56, which is other purchased services. And that looks like it's up about $6,000. A pretty hefty increase. I wonder if is that a specialized thing, or is that just an estimate of?
This is a cost to upgrade the entire listers maps.
Oh, yeah.
It's a contract that is being, I think, worked through the state of Vermont, and this particular company will be coming into Bennington and upgrading that entire 50 some odd pages of maps, so that they'll be more accurate, and that is a contracted cost, and that's a new cost, a one-time cost.
So we won't see that next year?
No.
Yeah, okay. All right, good. And then I was wondering a little bit about economic and community development salary and wages. I wondered if
where are you?
Sorry, page 4, 3650.1.
Yeah.
It's a relatively small increase. Are we likely to see an increase or a decrease next year?
Well, this is, as we usually do when we first fill a position, we generally tend to bring people in at less than what the current individual was making. So this increase reflects there was a 6-month review process for the new community development director, and this will be a 1-year review process, essentially bringing that position up to what it was before the previous person left. Excuse me.
Okay.
So yeah, you won't see this kind of an increase next year unless things change dramatically.
Okay, with the same employee, yeah, okay. The only other question I had for you,
maybe staying with that one.
Pluralize that first. How many employees sit under
There
that?
are 2 employees in this particular budget.
Okay, that's,
Administrative assistant and the director.
that's what I thought, but for a second there, you made it seem like there was more, and that's where I...
no, 2, I think, yeah.
But that's to bring the salary commensurate with the director for the community development, right? I mean, that's
who
was not economic and community development.
That's true, it's the
was
category.
just community
Yeah,
development.
that's right.
Yeah.
That category is old,
We
isn't
haven't
it?
changed
Yeah.
the name.
That's
on
why
this
it's kind of
particular
confusing.
budget sheet.
Yeah, that maybe is the wrong heading for it.
Yeah.
Last sort of picky question, Stuart, and I apologize for all these, but page 5, 3700.6, whatever, $6,000 increase on professional services. Is that something we could
Yes.
do without?
Yeah, that is all for legal services. And if you take a look at the how this has been running. Actual in 2017, 2018. Now, 2018 was the solar battle, the height of the solar battle. But
didn't we get reimbursed to some extent?
well, for that, we got reimbursed,
Yeah.
but in most cases, this is legal assistance that, yes, some of it goes to court fees where we might get reimbursed, but most of it is simply doing the business at hand.
And we've got a pretty, as I looked at the, not the contract, the fee arrangement, it was very in line with what municipals pay for. In fact, it's below a lot of municipal service fees for attorneys.
And in fact, as Rob Wilmington slowly steps back, as he moves into his later life, we're now contracting for some of the municipal legal questions with Jim Barlow, who did the work on the charter for us, but we're maintaining Rob's firm for some of the litigation issues that we do face from time to time.
I think we get a pretty good bang for our buck.
So
At least
Tom, you
mine.
feel like the
Yeah.
20,000 range is,
Yeah.
21,000 range is where we should be on that?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I defer to your billing expertise. Yeah.
No, it's just because I think we're getting a pretty good,
Pro bono for it.
yeah, yeah, right.
That's all for me, thank you.
And when I'm off the board next year, I want to have it bid out, though. Oh, I'm sorry. No. That was not on the record. Is there anything else? No. Okay. Jim? Good. Carson?
No, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Gene, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
one question on page 13, under the highway fund budget, line 5106, professional services. You know what that is?
Those are, once again, our anticipated legal fees,
Okay.
and I can try to pull that out and see what,
It's not a huge amount of money, it was
No,
just
it's
a huge
not.
increase.
but it is, it's for legal services related to highway activity, and
Easements and stuff.
yeah, here again, it's, what we've done is we've taken a look back to prior years, and in FY18, we're at $3,900 already expended. And FY17, we were almost at $2,200. So it's just anticipating greater increase. Could you probably reduce that by $1,000? Perhaps. And I will look into that.
That's all I have.
Great, thanks, Jim. I think what I'd like to do is if, tonight, or today, so it's not tonight, deal with the libraries and the rescue squad as far as making a decision relative to their requests. And then also, if we have time, I'd like to deal with the administrative salaries so that we can do that in executive session and come out with that as well. If that's all right, Stu, does that?
That would be perfect.
Yep.
And just, if I could just summarize
Yep.
what we've talked
Yep.
about
Yep.
as potential cuts, $40,000 reduction in the roof repair or roof replacement, potentially $11,000 in a part-time position at the senior center, $44,000 some odd dollars in the truck for buildings and grounds, and perhaps $1,000 in legal expenses for the highway division, potential total of $95,000 in reductions.
What about the staff member that we talked about?
I didn't include that one, because I'm fighting for that one.
That doesn't mean you can't include it.
Well,
I mean, that's
if
your-
you add that, it's up to 130,000 potential cuts.
Yeah.
40 some odd thousand for a staff person.
I know it's not a enjoyable conversation to have, but I think since we talked about it, it should be on the list.
Okay, it's on the list.
And then what I'd like to do is get through that, and then we can talk about dealing with the other budgets as far as finalizing the police, fire, and highway. I don't think we'll have time today, frankly, but we'll see. Okay, so why don't we take up the Bennington Free Libraries request. The request was, looking at the allocation for last year, we had allocated, and the town voters had approved a budget for $470,000. There's been a proposed allocation request for $488,000, or $18,000. Could I get a motion on that one way or the other?
I would make a motion that we approve their budget for the $18,000 increase.
Second?
Second.
Discussion, or more discussion. And this is a time to speak up. Hearing none? Okay, I'm sorry.
You don't need it.
Okay, hearing none, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
That's 7 in favor and no opposition. The John J. McCullough Library has made a request from $22,000 to $32,000. Could I at least get a motion for the purpose of discussion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, discussion. There's an increase of about 50%, right? Almost. What's your response, reaction, other than, that's a big jump. And frankly, from my perspective, it looks like a very big jump. But I can understand the rationale for it, predicated upon the presentation, that this organization has been behind the financial 8 ball for a number of years, primarily because of lack of real quality leadership that was not evident until about a year or two ago. But I was impressed by the presentation of the officers, and this morning it seems to be consistent with their needs. Maybe the entire board here doesn't feel that, the argument is made that would support a full allocation of the request, but I leave it to you to have some discussion. It's a big number.
It is a big number. I continue to struggle with this, but I do feel that both libraries are available to the entire community, that all taxpayers are being asked to pay for these things. If we were paying on a per capita basis, the North Bennington Library would be asking for $52,000 at the rate that the Bennington Library is asking for money. So if at some level, the Bennington taxpayers should feel good about this number. It's less than $52,000. I feel a little bit squeamish about the fact that North Bennington taxpayers are going to be paying essentially more for their library services than Bennington taxpayers.
But it's part of, it's out of choice of having that special little library right there in that corner in the center of North Bennington.
But as we learned today, a third of their use comes from other parts of the town, and it is available to everybody.
Yeah.
So while I don't like to see that big an increase, it does feel to me like it's still within the realm of North Bennington is Bennington too. We are all in this together, and we all pay taxes. It feels to me like it's still less than, as a Bennington taxpayer, I feel like I'm still getting a good deal by supporting their library at the requested amount, as opposed to, say, a $52,000 amount, which would be much higher.
It just long-term, I said it from the beginning, at some point we have to understand that, can this community, as in Bennington and North Bennington, does it make financial sense long-term to have 2 libraries?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something where I respect all their services. It's an incredible place, wonderful people running it. That's the question, that's the hard one for the select board to look at every year. And that's the part, I'm not questioning $30,000. I think it's a great bang for the buck. Just from a long-term perspective, I just start to worry. Are we just slowly, painfully going down this road and not accepting of the fact sometimes you're not going to be able to have Or does it become especially large?
Well, and it's complicated, it's in the same way that parks are complicated, right? So North Bennington, we pay very little for their parks, and yet we have access to their parks, and to Lake Perrin, and to these other...
I'm not suggesting shutting the doors on this institution. I'm just, continue to say, it's frighteningly obvious at some point where we're headed.
Except, well, and maybe so, but I do think, I mean, the thing that continues to impress me about the McCullough Library is that they are small and scrappy, and they work really hard to bring in patrons, to bring in activities, and to bring in money. And, I think, if we continue with this trend and we see that we are ending up needing to subsidize more and more each year, then that's one thing. But I feel like a bit of this is sort of getting people to a place where they can not just focus on staying alive, but actually do something. But I don't know, I continue last year and this year, I think it's really impressive the way they look at the community, the larger community, and really put themselves out there. And it feels like in 2 more years, I may have a different sense of this, but right now it feels like they're working really hard to get themselves to a place where they're financially stable.
We're agreeing, though, with all, if there's a percentage increase like this next year,
then we would start to work.
Well, that's where I can really feel what you're saying, and this will get, for me, to the...
point of fair.
Emergency rescue services, too, but all of these different things, the big jumps are the hard jumps, right? They're really hard on taxpayers, they're really hard on the community. If we can look at 10% increases or some sort of gradual way to get there, Carson, I'm with you that another increase like this wouldn't be acceptable.
Jeannie, do you want to weigh in?
I feel like the North Bennington Library is on an upswing. I really do. And I feel like if we back off now, it could really kind of stop them in their tracks, or at least slow them down. And I think maybe this is not the right time to pull back, but to instead to support them, encourage them, and give them what they're asking for, and hope for the best. But yes, I also agree with the concerns that it may become untenable to have an untenable situation to have 2 libraries. But I hope that doesn't happen, and I'm going to err on the positive side, that they can become sustainable.
And if it makes us feel any better, the Shaftesbury is $20,000. It's just the little town of Shaftesbury supporting the library, not in its jurisdiction per se. So for us to be giving $32,000, it's not really it's not inconsistent with what the other towns are doing.
I always look at these budgets in terms of what would happen if we offered them half as much as they've asked for. And I don't see it happening. And, the computer place would be the only place that I feel like that might be able to happen, because most of these other things are really hard costs and don't represent increases. They represent new fees from the state, new salaries.
Well, and the fact that their staff is part-time with no benefits, I mean, that's bare bones.
Right.
But really not acceptable.
And if anybody's worked on a computer system that's antiquated and doesn't work anymore, and it takes 10 minutes to boot up, and then it prints out the wrong stuff, and I can imagine that they could be wasting so much time on that in itself could be false economy. So I don't see where we can offer them 50% on this increase, but maybe we can put it out with a sort of a caveat that this is the catch-up year.
Our job isn't to tell them what their strategic plan is for the next 5 to 10 years. I think this money is well spent. I just think
they better get the message.
They don't have a very clear strategic plan going out. The short-term plans that we're doing every year, which is give them the money to stay open. I love the fact they're scrappy. They're doing everything they can. Last year compared to this year was a great presentation. It really talked about how they made it through. I'm not suggesting we cut this number, 32,000, I think is a good deal. I just worry that we're just putting Band-Aids on the path they're on, so maybe they do look to reinvent themselves. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with it, but I just get nervous for them.
Is it time to move the question? All in favor of the requested allocation of $32,000 signify by aye. Aye. Is that 7? Good. Okay. The Bennington Rescue Squad, I got to get a motion for the purpose of the discussion.
So moved.
And the request by the Bennington Rescue Squad, we allocated $150,000. The requested proposed allocation in our budget this year is $220,000. We have it now for discussion. Reactions, responses, and I think I already know Jim's response, so you don't have to repeat it.
So I spoke with them a little bit afterwards, but I think it's exceedingly hard for us to treat these guys somewhat like, these people somewhat like a parallel branch of our government when we're on different accounting systems and different fiscal years. And if these folks were going to join the hospital, for example, instead of the town, partner more with the hospital instead of the town, then maybe the fiscal year they're on would make sense. But if they're going to become more and more integrated in what we do, and we're going to be looking harder and harder at their budgets, I really think it's going to be critical for us to get on the same budget year. We can't, it's really hard to look at 6 months of one amount and 6 months of another amount and to be able to figure out which are apples and which are oranges. So if we do approve this request, I think it should come with a strenuous request that they adopt our fiscal year system so that we at very least can make the budgets line up.
Chad?
I'll just echo Donald's comment that it would help with trying to look at it, make predictions, and just being on the same fiscal year would be helpful.
I agree with that. I deeply support the work that they're doing, and I think it's a fine organization. I have a whole lot of trouble with increasing $70,000. I mean, we're looking at, we're talking about, how are we going to, take a truck that, ought to be turned in and use it for building staff and cutting, I don't know, 70,000 just feels like a huge number
And part
to me.
of the problem is we don't know what their interest income is going to be, off of because they're in a different fiscal year and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's really hard.
It's difficult to measure apples and apples, but the essence, I think we have to use our best judgment based upon also, as I again go back to Stuart was very clear, right, when he made the presentation or, cover sheet that we were shared with, that our revenue sources are not going to increase this year.
Right.
We're dealing with the same revenues or less.
Yeah.
And I think today, that's why I was looking at the trucks and all those things, is because we've got to find ways to limit the exposure, because the petitions that have gone out are how many thousands would that be? 700 something?
I'm sorry?
The petitions, or not the petitions, but the agencies that are on the budget?
Yeah, well, we have 2 that are petitioning this year, that, as I understand it, the remainder is something like 119,000.
Yeah, I mean,
I think, so Tom, last year at this time, I really felt strongly that we needed to increase our support for the rescue services, but that we needed to not do it all at once. And largely that was based on the fact that they had a lot of interest income coming in on their endowment. This year they don't have that. So I get it. They're in a different situation, and I get that some of their problems are more acute. The staffing is more acute, and it's even worse with the compensation for their services. So I get that those things are all, but they are nevertheless sitting on a very large multi-million-dollar endowment, and so it feels to me like we should strive to get to full funding for them, but I'm just not sure we need to do it all at once. If we could get there. Last year I had suggested that we offer a series of 10% increases every year, and I think you and the board told me we couldn't commit this year's dollars at that point, but at very least I think we should be thinking about an increase every year until we get to the point that their funding is correct, but I'm not sure we need to do it all at once. So perhaps we do a much larger, a 25% increase, and maybe something like that would be better, to look at 25% increases until we get to the point that their budget's whole. But as long as they're sitting on that large endowment, even though it is, I get it, they're being fiscally responsible, they're saving that for their machinery, but unlike any other town budget, they have this reserve, which our town departments don't necessarily have. So I'd like us to consider a step, some sort of a step system, getting to their number, getting to 220, but maybe not doing it all in this tax year.
You want to put a proposal right now on the floor?
No, I'd like to hear what else you want to
let's
say
then-
first, yeah.
Jim, do you have you said, yeah.
I know what I think.
As to the present motion.
So I would just like to hear more about, suggested percentage increases from Donald on it. You mentioned 10% last year. I heard you say that loud and clear. 25% is your suggestion this year. It would still be a significant jump compared to what we've kind of stored on the confines of, we give you grief if you go up 2% or 3%. I get the difference, but if you want to make
If we went 25%, we would, I think that would really be uncomfortable for them. I think it's going to be a small number. What would that be? 25, 80,
38,000.
82.5,
37.
37.5?
Yeah.
So that would be
187.5.
187.5 as opposed to 220. So it would be shorting their request by something north of $30,000. But I'll still be on the board next year. I would be interested in, a similar increase next year if that's what it takes to make them whole. But I would love to see how their interest income comes out for the rest of the year. So.
Because that question might not even be, that type of question might not be asked next year. Because I just want to have. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I don't think anyone around this table is questioning the value of having a rescue squad. That's a given. Obviously costs are rising, driven by staff needs, reimbursements going down. Everyone understands that. I feel like there's such a structural problem that, they can't help, they can't fix that, but it seems to me that there could be solutions out there that, and maybe they've investigated them and there aren't. I just feel like there's got to be a way to help close the gap. Maybe it would mean hiring some sort of a consultant, which I understand would incur a cost, but there may be value in that. We can't be alone. They can't be alone in this struggle, and I would love to know what other states, rescue squads in other states are doing. I don't know. I don't pretend to know, but I'm curious. I guess I'm just curious.
I think I'd like to have the question moved, at least for the purposes of the vote. All in favor of the requested allocation of $220,000 signify by aye.
Aye.
One in favor. And the motion fails. Is there any other motion on the floor that if someone would like to make, I'll entertain?
If you're looking for a motion, I guess I could make a motion that we increase their budget by 25% in the following year. And that we request they
go to the same fiscal
year.
Can you do that in dollars?
I'm happy to. Didn't we get to, we did this last year, and then we said, let's do it for a certain amount of years. It was like 5 years. It got failed because we were putting a burden on select boards in the future that we
can't
have control.
I just wanted to remember.
That's why we can't do it for future years.
I just
Although
wanted
you and
to
I
make
will
sure.
both be on the board next year. And if they come back and that hole is still 220, I would be interested, I would be open to another increase to kind of get the full funding.
33% would be a $50,000 increase, and even 200. Is that too much?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would make a motion that we do, 25%. I've made my motion, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't
And
know
what
if
is 25%?
25% would be 37.5. in addition to the 150, so 187.5.
Yep.
And a request to switch their budgeting system.
Do I have a second?
Second it.
Now discussion?
Is this too cheap? Having made the motion, I will say, they're in a real crisis, and
Would you go to
we really-
30?
We really rely on them.
Would you go to 30%?
It's
Not me,
but,
it's
you know,
us.
this is us, the board, yep. I sympathize and appreciate the squad's effort, but I also sympathize, we sit here representing the entire community that has to pay the tax dollars. And frankly, our community is really stressed right now. And we have to recognize we can't just, we've given a lot of thought, and that the community is only going to see the bottom line, what we've done. But we have to raise these taxes to support these agencies. And I think the suggestion is a slowly incremental increase to get to the point. Hopefully, maybe we'll have a better next year for the stock market. But I think that a $37,500 increase is a pretty substantial one. That's why I will support that motion.
Question for
I will.
clarification.
The existing one, the existing motion.
2 years ago, when the voters approved the initial, was that 207,000?
207, yes.
Yeah, 27.
So this doesn't even bring it up to that amount from 2 years ago?
Right.
Arguably, yes, a number of voters thought it was a one-time request. So,
Yeah, they thought it was for 5 years, which was not accurate and unfortunate. Other folks?
It's tough.
I would love to, Stuart, I would love to know your opinion on this. I didn't know we were going to get right to a vote on this today, but you've looked over these budgets, you know how these things work, you know how personnel costs work, you're one of the best budgeters I know. What do you think?
Well, it's hard for me to look at their budget and understand all of the nuances that create the costs that they have. But when you listen to the possibility that they're bringing on 6 new employees and the associated costs that go with benefits and insurance such as workers' comp, that's when you look at their budget, that's where the increases are: salaries and wages, benefits, and workers' comp. And so I say their budget is a realistic budget. But, how do we help them fund that? And that's really the question. I think Forrest does a great job as the director there. I think their board does a great job in presenting a budget and helping us understand what their problems are. And I'm glad that I don't have to sit here and vote on it.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay, but we do. And I think, let's vote on this motion.
Remind us.
25%. It's $187,500 figure. That's great. And mathematician down there?
That's correct.
Okay. Signify your acceptance or not by saying aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay. So 6 and opposed? 1. 6 to 1, right? Okay. So that's the reflective decision relative to those budgets. We will take, I would like to ask the town manager and anyone else that has salary issues to leave the room. We'll go into executive session for personnel matter. Could I have a motion to go into executive session?
Motion to go into executive.
Stu's going to keep notes so he can use them to...
I got it.
The board has dealt with the town manager, town treasurer, and the town clerk's salaries for fiscal year 1920, but I will enter... 2020. Whoa! 19-20. 19-20. Right? 2019, 2020. That's, yeah, I'm sorry. Anyway, so is there, I will entertain a motion for the town manager's salary.
I'd like the motion to set the town manager's salary at $110,642.
Second.
What is the percent increase?
No, we don't talk about that. Let the population figure.
The secretary couldn't get that.
Sorry, the amount, $110,642.
110,642. Thank you.
And I've seconded that, so.
Discussion? So we appreciate, and I'll speak for the board, we've appreciated your effort and leadership in the past year, and this increase is a reflection of that, and small reflection of that effort, and really do appreciate that. So you can put however prose and poetry you want to add to that. But all in favor of the salary for the town manager for next year, signify by aye.
Aye.
That's 7 in favor. Are there any other motions relative to the treasurer?
Treasurer?
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to set the treasurer's salary at $14,708.
Second.
Any further discussion or a discussion on it?
I'll be abstaining.
There'll be one abstention on this vote. All in favor of the motion, signify by aye.
Aye.
That's 6 in favor and 1 abstention. The town clerk salary for next year, 2019-2020.
I'd like the motion to set the salary at $81,745.
Second.
Any further discussion on that? And Cassie, we really, as a board, appreciate all your efforts to keep the elections in line, the people in line, not all of the board members in line, but for the most part, we really...
$81,745.
No, that can't be right. No, it's 80, isn't it 84?
Wait,
It's 84,801.
84,
We must have been working off
801.
a bad number, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a bad number.
Yes.
I was like, no, that's not
wonder.
right.
Oh, plus 2%, times 2%.
Yeah, okay, shoot.
Cassie?
They're different
Governor
numbers.
Shumlin was asking. Just wanted to let you know. Shumlin.
Sorry, so we went off of 8142?
No, that's wrong.
Yeah, that was her salary from the previous year.
Yeah.
I sent out a corrected sheet.
No, we
that's
didn't
it.
have to correct
Yeah.
the sheet.
Our
Okay.
apologies.
Sorry about that.
That's why we don't let them vote on all the positions.
We do, well, it'll reflect that, and it's 84, 8 plus 2%, times 2%.
So we used that same sheet with the other,
We didn't have the revised one.
Yeah, but that was, I think, the only place that
It was the only revision.
was revised, wasn't it, on Cassie's?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only one.
I sent out that one page.
Yeah.
Can't find it.
But it was,
It's here somewhere.
it was there. Thank you very much for all, I'll take and add to that prose and poetry motion. All in favor of the town clerk's salary for next year, signify by aye.
Aye.
Grateful aye. That's 7 in favor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do have to, we're still in public session. We haven't voted on the very highway, fire, police department budgets.
Right.
And I think there might be a little discussion, not a lot, but I don't really want to keep the board here. Could we do it? Again, I think because we're going to have that presentation on the marketing thing on Monday, which may impact some part of this. Could we reconvene at some point? And maybe I'd like to have it so it's not on a Saturday.
Well, certainly we can do that. I mean, I was going to try to take a look at some of the suggested cuts that you folks had and come up with a number to solidify the general fund number, which would assume, at this point anyway, no cuts in the police department. And perhaps we should get together some night next week for a very short session at the town offices, just to finalize the budget so we can get the warning put together and get that ready for you on the 28th.
Do we want to do any further picking on, not picking, but inspecting sort of BCRC, Lake Parent, some of the other things that...
I thought we were pretty comfortable with the BCRC, and because it's a...
Lake Parent did have that one question for an additional one-time funding for $10,000.
And we haven't heard from them yet.
And you haven't heard from them. And BCRC is actually requesting less money this year than they did last year by combining.
It's pretty likely we'll support a lower request.
Yeah, but I think we should hear from them or not hear from them before we just, decide on that. Maybe between now and when we do reconvene, they'll get you something, Stu, that you can be comfortable in sharing.
I sure would hope so.
Because right now,
And can I ask, did RSVP ever send us budget?
Who?
RSVP.
They didn't have a budget?
No.
They request RSVP, just an agency that's going to be on the ballot? We had no financials from them?
I thought they followed up with that after the fact. I'd have to go
Perhaps you
through my
sent it
file.
out. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to hear from any of the agencies on the ballot until
That night.
until that night, until town meeting?
Yeah, the policy or the motion you guys put in place was if you don't ask for more money and you supply us the right information, you're on the ballot.
So they didn't supply the right
Well,
information, that's sort of
I
why...
think they did, but it was after the fact. But I'll
Okay,
check that.
as of 2 weeks ago, they had not, because that's
Really?
when I had emailed you about it. All right, but, but my question, so this information is now available on the web for the public, is that right?
It is on the web.
Okay.
But as far as the RSVP, I don't think we should just sort of sit on our hands, because if they aren't going to share that as per the directive, then we want the public to know that. That's it. I mean, that's why we have everybody else playing by that rule.
Yeah, that's true. That's the rule we made.
I have that, and it says that they don't have their budget.
Oh, no, I think I was looking at their donations from other communities. They do show a breakdown by county,
But not their budget.
FY18 actual, FY budget.
Yeah, I think maybe on the, we can take this offline. We'll
But
take
there
it
are
offline.
several things that I expected to have conversation about that we haven't yet. So the parent, was the parks request from North Bennington factored into we haven't had an explicit conversation about that.
That's right, that was not factored in.
Okay, so I do feel like we probably should have talked about it then, and we still should talk about it. The Bennington Downtown Alliance, the BCRC, and the Parent Recreation are things I expected this board to chew on, I guess, collectively.
I thought we were going to do the Bennington Downtown
Right.
Alliance in February.
Yeah, that's right. We are.
Beg pardon, that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, so BDA, but BCRC, Parent Recreation, and North Bennington Parks, I guess, would be request.
Yeah, I mean, the North Bennington is a level-funded request. They haven't changed it in years, once you started doing it. And the Lake Perrin annual request is the same, it's just that they have that special one-time offer. So, shall we try to find a time this coming week where we can get together quickly in an evening?
Yep. Wednesday evening? Do you want to call in or anything like that?
I could.
Yep. Well, have you just call in. Jim will call in.
Yes.
And at what time? What time does you adjourn from the sessions usually?
Committees usually adjourns about 4, but we've got a new chairman on this one. And they said that last year they went as late as 6. And you know how happy that makes me.
Yeah.
But we're in session, we're usually done by about 3.
Could we, would 5:30 or 5? What would work?
5's too early.
5:30?
5:30?
On Wednesday? Okay.
What?
Wednesday?
Wednesday?
Do we have time to?
And where do you want me to call? Town office?
Yeah, Jim, I'll email you the phone number to the conference room.
Okay.
Is there anything else, folks?
So that means not next Saturday?
Not next Saturday.
Okay.
Anything but next Saturday.
And you're saying town office?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything but next Saturday. As much fun as it is.
I know. Well, get together with you guys every Saturday morning, it's kind of nice. We stand adjourned.